Alrighty,
Hey,
here we are.
yes we are.
What a pleasure. This has been a long time in the making.
It has. Sorry, it's taken us so long to get to this, but we are here, and I think that's what matters, right?
That is what matters.
Yeah.
Life gets in the way, but life finds a way.
That it does.
Right.
Always.
And here we are together at last. My good friend Zach Parnes.
Hello,
The one, the only.
Mr. Medium.
Oh, thank you. Zach, would you go ahead and do me a favor?
Yeah, what's up?
Could you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience
For sure.
in as few of words as possible?
Okay, in few words as possible. My name is Zach Parnes. I'm a 5-time AP award-winning sports journalist, sports anchor, lover of life. How about that? Those were few words.
I like it. I like it. It's harder to be succinct,
Yeah.
than to talk a lot.
Less is more.
Yeah, and
More
less is
often than
more.
not.
The impact.
Yeah.
So I like people to do that. I don't like to sound. It's like I want to hear as little about you as possible in that, which is
Right.
like one way someone could interpret it, and as few as words as possible.
Yeah.
I could see that, but I like the idea of somebody being challenged to say, "I am these points."
For sure.
Yeah.
Especially because we all kind of have an elevator pitch or, sort of like things that we go to or identity points that we
Yeah.
claim to and whatnot. I mean, even I have them,
You
like
had a
talking
good
about
one.
the journalism aspect
You
of
had a good
things.
one with the award winning, and boy, did you deserve him. This guy
Thanks.
is good at what he does.
Try to be. It can be hard sometimes, but
Why don't you get into a little more, just telling people about what it is exactly that you do and the
Yeah.
things you enjoy most to do?
Wow, kind of a good question, just because I'm still kind of figuring that out, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us are, obviously. Man. So I think I have to kind of lead with just background. This is my kind of pursuit as a, sports anchor, sports journalist, whatever it be, has been like a long time in the making. It's always been a core part of identity for me. But I think, kind of got started with that. I had a really unique opportunity to be a kid reporter for Sports Illustrated for Kids when I was like 12, 13, 14 years old. And because of that, it sort of laid the foundation for like, wow, this is like something I would really like to do with my life. I mean, primarily I would have loved to be an NFL linebacker, but at 5'9", 160 pounds, it's probably not going to work out for me. But yeah.
So were sports something that was loved by your family?
Yeah, for sure. They were like a huge like intersect point, especially with my dad, my sister, and I. My mom is a part of it too, but like
Were they big Steelers fans prior to the family being assembled, or was the family a reason to justify this thing to do together?
yeah, I mean, my dad's always had sports fandom. He especially grew up a huge Yankees fan. His
Okay.
dad is from the Bronx, so
So it goes way back.
yeah, so I think it's, kind of a part of community for us and, a common bonding point, etc. But, like, obviously, like, within the sport, like, a lot of it is about the experience, being able to go to games with my dad, have really great experiences like that, or, all of us going as a family, etc. Those kinds of things, I think, really solidified kind of, like, the importance, I guess, that it holds. But at the same time, like, it is just one part of the multifaceted human, if you will.
Well, it's interesting because with that, it feels like sports are in a way just a medium for that shared bonding experience.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, definitely.
And like I think that a lot of people end up a fan of something for their lifetime because of a fleeting feeling they had for something because of the connection they had with a person.
Yeah.
Especially in formative years.
Definitely.
Those memories you have with a parent going to
Definitely.
sports or with friends enjoying sports.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the methods. The other method is like, and because I've worked with a number of these people, are the people that have played and given a huge part of their life to said game, whatever it might be, and they want to continue, whether that be through coaching or mentorship, broadcasting, etc. I mean, there's so many different kind of like multitudes of ways that people can kind of have that involvement. But I would say those are like the two primary roads that people
Well,
tend
it's
to
a
walk.
unique platform for storytelling and the human experience for one.
Totally.
And then it's just a unique vector of the human experience that if you get so good at a thing, you can be compensated for it, for one, even if it's just something like a game.
Yeah, sure.
But then also, if you get so good at it, you can get compensated for talking about it.
For sure.
Which is in the position you're in.
Yeah.
So you have that intersection of that love of sports.
Definitely.
You have that interplay of being somebody who's very verbose and charismatic.
Well, thanks.
And they kind of came together in this beautiful harmony. Do you see sports and the talking in front of people being a consistent theme in your future? Or do you see yourself,
$1 million question, man.
yeah, deviating around and dipping toes into other areas?
Yeah, I think, it's important to always still stay well-rounded, especially in today's day and age where like a lot of traditional, sports talk, sports shows, etc. are sort of, kind of going the way of the wind, and there's this, sort of takeover. I do think there will always be, and this is from talking with a lot of people, working with them, and also just seeing what happens, live games will always be a mechanism for people to, sit around, watch, and enjoy, or go to the event, etc., those kinds of things. But yeah, I've certainly thought about, a lot of pivots in a lot of different directions. I think especially today with the field being as competitive as it is, there's probably more people trying to do what I'm doing now than there ever have been. And because of that, I think you have to be ready to take some side steps. So like, my mentor is this guy, Matt Martucci, who is the play-by-play broadcaster for St. Joe's in Philadelphia. Really, really great guy. Syracuse alumnus as well. But he met his wife, fell in love. They have 2 children, and ultimately the sports broadcasting business is very fickle in terms of how many plates it provides to really give an actual livelihood to for people. So he's pivoted. He still does that and does the basketball tournament on ESPN. He calls Muay Thai fights in Philly as well. But he's a realtor now, for like the greater Philadelphia area. So, kind of reinventing a skill set, using a method of communication and connection to put it into a totally different kind of set of, eggs in a basket. So I think I look at, somebody like him and a lot of other people as like, that's the way that it is. Another figure that comes to mind is Gary Streisky of ESPN, who is a Sports Center anchor, but on top of that, also his own, he doesn't like to refer to them as landlords, but he is a landlord by all intents and purposes. He owns several apartments, rents them out, etc. So that is like his secondary means to create more income, because again, ultimately there's probably only a few, and I don't want to say a few dozen, because like there's obviously local sports journalists across the country that make a living, but maybe not a great wage. But it's definitely competitive, and because of that, like you kind of have to be ready, especially in today's day and age. It's why I've been, super interested in trying to build a personal brand, jump into different opportunities where I'm a 1099 contractor, so like working for, an appellate group even for a week or 2 weeks to just be able to pick up some extra cash on the side. So, but yeah, it's definitely, like a lot of other art forms, there are starving artists, and I think that this is, part of it for sure. And it's also why a lot of sports people transition to news, or, transition into like more of the sales space as well, whether that be something that's like QVC adjacent or just into a traditional role too. So
yeah, it's interesting because it almost feels like it somewhat demands that that versatility if you're getting into perspective sharing industry, especially if you're somebody who's not necessarily immediately connected with that sport.
Most definitely, yeah.
Or that whatever you're commentating.
Yeah, and I think, this is going to be consumed on YouTube. I don't know if you go to other platforms too, so sorry.
We might do Spotify.
Cool, yeah. So
apparently you can just load them up on Spotify.
By all means, then you should. But yeah, so like, point being, this will be digitally consumed. That's obviously overtaken a huge part of the market share. I saw a story the other night that said that it's somewhere around, this digital kind of marketing content perspective is now at least a $15 billion industry at very minimum. So like, it's starting to catch slowly. And I've realized this not just from a consumer of that content, but also as someone who's actively participating in the, career marketplace of it. My 2 biggest inclinations. One, I'm actively interviewing for roles right now across the country that are traditional sports jobs, but aren't. So they are labeled as sports director, sports anchor, etc. But they really want you to come in and start producing a lot more content for digital. One job in particular, I won't go into details because of whatever, but at a very major player in a top 50 television market, they are looking for someone to come in and blow the whole thing up. Like, they don't want someone going up there and talking about, here's what happened yesterday, here are the highlights from the Packers game last night. They know that people are getting those things from different methods. They instead want someone to come in there with a very clear creative vision to be able to drive not only social engagement, but also refer people back to their broadcast TV product. And the second thing that I look at is my alma mater being the first university as of this week to institute a digital creator program. So they are partnering the journalism school and the business school to create a digital creator emphasis for students that they'll be able to take on as a minor.
And now, do you feel you're better equipped personally for functioning on that sort of idea level, or through the expression of skill level of the actual commentating in the moment?
Yeah, it's funny because
what do you think your skill set's dedicated to?
I would say because of the way that I built things, it's more towards the versatility and the building in the digital space now. But by the same token, like my education is very traditional, right? Like I went to a university that emphasizes a strong writing background, strong telecommunication skills. And on top of that, taking information and surmising it into, whatever, which is still super applicable for the digital side of things. I think given my creativity and maybe lack of I've never been the traditional guy to stand up there and say, well, the Ravens won 20-17, and I've done those hits on TV, but at the same time, like that's not really what I love to do. Like I love taking and honestly, like this is my biggest thing now is trying to collaborate with a team or find some team to join to be able to, better market myself.
Do you feel you have strong inclinations about the future of the landscape of the space?
Yeah, I do, but I also there's like an inner part of me that like wants the traditional everything else to survive, the PTIs, the whatever, those kinds of things. I obviously I grew up on that stuff, so like it holds a special reverence to me. But I also understand with like consolidation of human attention spans and also just the fact that people are consuming so many different things so chronically throughout the day. Like that is something that I certainly hold on to for. But
do you feel like you have because of that like early seed of that love of sports, that you have this like operative desire to be on ESPN someday, just for the validation of like, oh, I made it to the leader, that was like make it back to, because technically you were already, right? What was the kids?
Sports Illustrated.
Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
Okay. Not
but still like a national platform, etc.
Does ESPN own Sports Illustrated now?
They do not. No, okay. No. Yeah, they're still owned by Disney. I think SI is.
Oh well, Disney owns ESPN.
Yes, correct. Sorry.
Okay, so they're all under that umbrella.
Yeah, but I believe SI is owned by Time Life.
I don't think it was at that time.
No.
Back then, right?
I think they were still under the affiliation. But anyhow,
you're probably right.
No, I think ESPN has always been really cool, but I also, I acknowledge that there is a lot of, and I'll choose my words carefully here, but I acknowledge that there's been people that have had a lot of different experiences there, ranging from, longtime anchor guy, Scott Van Pelt type role, etc. People that I know who are there now who have largely good experiences, to obviously people who have gone on to their own kind of thing and branched out, whether that be their own independent thing, or they've kind of pivoted into another landscape, or they go the freelance route and they're able to do that, and then sometimes they're tied back together kind of thing, so like Pat McAfee's a huge example of that right now, who's like the dominant player. Great. Yeah, the dominant player at ESPN, great energy, etc.
Well, him and Saban, right, are so fun together.
Yeah, they are. It's a really good tandem.
Yeah.
I would say it's less about ESPN for me and more about obtaining a national level. Covering professional is really the goal for me.
So more than anything, it would like check a box like that. It's like, it was cool to do.
Yeah, definitely.
If that happens.
Yeah, I also
but it can be anywhere where you get that.
Yeah,
ability
I also know from a number of people who have been there that and this is with no disrespect to the company, but that Bristol, Connecticut is a very hard place to live. There's just
it's haunted, right?
Maybe.
Isn't Connecticut like the most haunted state?
That could well be. That would be interesting.
Isn't that where like Stephen King lives and all those stories are? Isn't that where like it's set?
It honestly could be. I'm not a big horror consumer, so I can't really speak on it too much. But is
that because like you avoid it out of fear, or
yeah,
or just don't enjoy it personally?
Yeah, a little of both. I would say definitely as a kid, I got pretty scared about things. I remember watching Insidious and like being really terrified and unable to sleep. Like I was like a freshman in high school.
Right? It's like a piece of media made to like kind of like make someone not want to watch it.
Right, but people do it anyways. Yeah, exactly. And honestly, hey, like more power to it. I've seen other horror films since then. I'm not like totally, out there. I watched the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre like a couple months ago. That was pretty good. So
yeah, that's an interesting one. It's very very gritty.
It is
a funny thread between all the exes I've ever had is they were like both Virgos and they were both like just allergic to horror films.
Really?
It could be like the worst one of all time.
Yeah.
And it was like traumatizing.
And they were anti.
Well, it's just crazy to me because like I'm I don't know, an autist for movies and like the production of movies and stuff. So I'm never really like scared at a movie.
Sure.
Like, it can catch you off guard and like get you like that, but it's like hard to like be like really horrified. And if a movie does that, it deserves like a lot of credit. Usually what gets me on that level is body horror.
Like the gore stuff, or like
anything that like attacks like that autonomy, you know, like the sense that your body's not yours.
Oh, I get it.
Not just mutilation, but
sure, more like possession, or like.
Have you seen The Fly?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you should check out The Fly because you like Jeff Goldblum, right?
I do. Yeah,
you should check out The Fly
with
Jeff Goldblum. That's like the remake, technically, of the black and white one.
Got it.
But it's really fun and it plays on like body horror a lot. It's a David Cronenberg movie.
I will say this also, like, I feel like I would probably be much more adverse to horror if I had to go to the theater to watch it every single time, because those loud jump scares in the movie, like, I don't know. Like, I love a thriller, though. Like, I love a good psychological thriller or anything like that. Like, I remember how enthralled I was with Shutter Island seeing it for the first time. And I know that's, like, a super basic one to go to. But, like, you know, something like that, or, like, Ex Machina, or, like, whatever. Like, those are great films, and they definitely have me thinking about them a lot. But I really think it's, like, just the jump scares and stuff like that. Like, I think Saw is a little bit easier for me to digest, which I think is, you know, probably...
That's body horror.
Yeah, probably ironic in a way, but, like, I think that's a little bit easier than, like, The Conjuring, constant things popping out and, like,
when
you know, screams.
When you think Saw, which, like, individual moment do you think of? Like, what's the first, like, thing of Saw? The first challenge or that pops into your head?
This is super weird and very down the series, but the very first one I ever saw in completion was 5. So I think about they're like all strung to the neck collars, whatever, and they have to like go out and get that key, and then one of them gets like guillotined off that or whatever.
Oh my God, that's so absurd.
I know, it's probably the most obscure one too. Like you would think it's like you know, when he gets locked in the room and at the end of the first one or whatever, but I'm not a Saw connoisseur. I'm really making myself sound like one, but I think I was just like 14 and curious.
You know what my mind goes to? It's that scene where, because I barely remember all of them, you know, like I'd probably seen maybe how many are there now? Like 6
There's
or
gotta be
7
more
or
than
something?
7,
I've probably seen maybe 3, and each one only like one time.
Sure.
But I remember a scene where this girl's like reaching up into this box.
Yes! Yeah, that one's so bad.
Oh!
And she's getting her wrist cut.
The inflict of that. See, to me, that's like really well executed.
Yeah.
Body horror and just psychological horror.
Yeah, and it's almost like the carrot being dangled in front because she gets the syringe, but like can't actually get it because it's been like
falling
rigged.
Apart and it's cutting into
the
it's
arms. Totally been rigged. I mean, that's Jigsaw's whole MO, right? Is to put you in a situation where you have control but you don't, kind of thing. I think that was like his whole thing. I don't know. Again, not that I'm a Saw connoisseur, but yeah.
Yeah, no. Ugh.
They are something else, though. I don't think any horror film eclipses like my top films ever. But
what are your give me your top ones real quick?
Yeah, so I have a weird list that I kind of know off the top of my head that I always go to. I think Pulp Fiction is just a dialogue masterpiece. I really think it is. It's always kind of steadily been at the top. Maybe that is the basic boy kind of answer, but that's certainly up there. Yeah. I think No Country for Old Men is the perfect depiction of like a villain in terms of Anton Chigurh, like just being a total like menace and actual sociopath. And I think Josh Brolin in it is fantastic. Woody Harrelson is so good too. Like just a stacked cast from front to back. Kind of diverting, something we watched together actually, Singing in the Rain.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so
that's a fun one.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of just like childlike kind of euphoria and like, I don't know, like thinking about being a patron back then, watching that film, like it's just such, it's so special. That's definitely one. Another one, There Will Be Blood. I think Daniel Day-Lewis.
It's funny. My mind went to there when you brought up No Country. I feel like those movies are somewhat connected,
totally,
in terms of like aesthetic and execution.
Yeah, and then my fifth one's kind of weird, but I do think it's the greatest movie made about food ever, which is Ratatouille. I think it's just so special.
And it covers the animated slot.
Totally. Absolutely. Nice. Yeah. And I feel like it's between that and like probably Finding Nemo, because that had such a huge space in my childhood, like growing up as like top animated movie. But I just feel like I've seen Ratatouille so many times now where it's like, it just, I don't know. It really provokes like a lot of like deeper thinking on the perspective of like, the simple things can be so great while also still like kind of being, you know, a Disney movie that's super childlike and cute.
Well, that's like the beauty of all those Pixar movies, right? Yeah. It's like each one nails such a unique aesthetic, and for so long they were being so well executed that you could really pick any of them
Totally.
and be like, hey, that one could be on the top 100 best movies of all time.
Absolutely.
But you wouldn't necessarily pick 5 of them, even though they could have 5 representatives.
Yeah. I think I think someone would even go to like the older Disney movies as being so prolific in terms of the animation style and whatnot too. Like you think about like Snow White just being like a marvel of its time or anything like that.
It's interesting the subjective nature. I feel like they have so many good ones. It would like end up splitting votes.
Yeah, totally.
Because anybody could just be like, oh yeah, like The Incredibles, or like.
And then you got to be careful because if you're asking a legitimate Disney adult, their whole top 100 might be 30 films. So.
Oh yeah, yeah, and there's gonna be like the OG. The hand-drawn ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Those have got to be... I mean, I can't imagine what it was like for those guys. I was seeing a thing, just to draw a parallel, but a thing about Charles Schultz the other day, the founder of the Peanuts, and, endured just a ton of rejection just trying to get his very first comic ever published, which it had a different name. I forget what it is now. I think like Lil Ones or something like that, whatever. Anyhow. But also just the fact that he hand drew every single strip that was like ever published. And it's like, I don't know, there's a loss of like that kind of artisan and craftsmanship nowadays.
Yeah.
Or at least publicly on display.
I think. Yeah, it's interesting. It just, the nature of how things get promoted and such, it's hard because it almost feels like there's probably more stuff out there than ever before.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it's like, how do we invoke whether or not something exists, but it's so impossible to go find it? I often say that, or I at least was for a long time, like movies. I would mourn the state of modern filmmaking. Yeah. But then I'm like, well, I know there's got to be tons of independent movies I'll never see that are probably just bangers.
Yeah. Definitely.
But I don't know, maybe at the same time the things that do gain visibility and traction are those things.
Yeah.
It's a weird interplay like that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because my last year I worked in Salisbury for a number of years as a sports director of a TV station out there, and when I was out there, our chief editor, like a guy who'd been there for 30 plus years, reliable as hell, just a great guy. His side hustle was he liked to make little movies on the side or TV episodes kind of thing, short films is the correct term, but he asked me to be in one, which was like he grew up going to Ocean City all the time, etc., and he also loved Leave It to Beaver, so it was an intersection of those two shows, and he did all the direction for it, and we got brought on as the cast, and they were all renamed characters, etc. But he entered it in Ocean City Film Festival, ended up taking home an award for it and whatnot, which is super cool, and I'm so pumped for Marlon on that. I just remember though, like kind of like how many different works were there, and like some of them could use some work, but some of them were really like, wow, this is cool. Like this idea, this concept, like I remember one was like, all about this guy solving a puzzle and like him kind of having flashbacks per each, puzzle piece that he put in. And I was like, this is almost like a Memento kind of cross, thing going on. And I don't know. I think there's a lot of really great creative energy out there, and just unfortunately with the inundated kind of landscape that we have, it's hard to see any of that stuff.
Do you enjoy films that are of that nature, where it's like an unreliable narrator, surrealist, bad trip kind of filmmaking? Do you enjoy those?
A little bit. What did I see recently that kind of like was on that level? Oh God, I'm missing something now, but it was. Oh man, if I think of it, it'll come back to me. But yeah, I think I've always been drawn to those kinds of films. I also really like a lot of like sardonic and sad, awful stuff too. But like I've seen Requiem for a Dream 3 times. Like, that's a painful one to watch again.
Yeah, those themes tend to kind of collide.
Yeah, they definitely do.
Because they often play on those elements of like a bad trip, like people
definitely
like laughing at you. Or
ridiculing. A little bit of that. I would say also like I think anything that just evokes heavy emotion, I think is really really good. But I think above all else, like if you wanted to say you have to have this one thing. I think what really makes really great things awesome is like incredible character development. Like that's why I think Better Call Saul is better than Breaking Bad, because I think the character development is just so much more unique, and I think it leans less on like sensationalized violence and more on like the huge tropes that these characters go through, and how Nacho goes from like just kind of drug mule and kind of I'm going to do what I can to survive, to like ultra survivalist in the end, like literally taking every step he can to not get caught and whatnot. Sorry for the spoiler.
No worries.
Yeah, I feel like it's been out long enough.
I'm far behind on that one, but I got to get more into it.
Yeah, it's really great. But I would say definitely, like, as far as like films go, I lean towards that stuff. But I also, like, again, like Ratatouille's in my top 5. Like, there's some character development in that, but it could be described as stereotypical Disney development where, character is down, character realizes potential, character actualizes potential, happy ending kind of thing.
How do rats live?
That's a good question. I don't know.
That guy better be writing stuff down.
Yeah.
Writing the rats' recipes down.
Yeah, for real. And his family was super adverse to all of it, too.
Stuff's coming to an end.
More power to him. Rose above the you're a rat.
Yeah.
Decided he wasn't just going to be the ordinary rat.
All right, let's loop it back to sports.
Yeah,
sure.
I
enjoyed that diversion into films.
Always good.
Always open to talk about films.
For sure.
And those other ones you mentioned were good too. A lot of good titles you listed in there. But I just wanted to you were touching on that history with a bunch of different sports. Let's grab a core memory from each of those major sports leagues. When I say core memory and then I say NBA, what do you think of?
Man. The first one I go to, which is kind of sad, but is seeing the Suns get so close with Steve Nash and it never really working out. That was a huge one.
Yeah.
A personalized one, and I've been very blessed to have these experiences before we get into some of them, but going to the NBA Finals was so special. Like I got there very early to do some networking with some people that I had been watching on affiliate programs for a while. That was so awesome for me. It was kind of like a real high, like being there, and the Suns go up 2-0. I'm a Phoenix Suns fan against Milwaukee, and then they lose 4 straight games to lose the finals, which was brutal. But I think being there and being a part of that atmosphere, it was also the first Suns home game I had ever been to. I'm always a road fan, usually wherever I go. So like kind of be in the same atmosphere of people rooting on it, just along you, I think are huge. I guess, I'm sorry, because I'm throwing 3 things at you, but I think honestly, the most core memory in terms of my whatever was I had a podcast for a number of years on the Suns. We were an East Coast Suns fan thing.
Suns Talk Live?
Suns Talk Radio. Bingo.
Talk Radio.
You had it. That was sweet. But yeah, so, the NBA, like in the late 2000s, early 2010s, was getting to that resurgence, but wasn't quite there. The reason I say that is they were more willing to take on freelance media contributors. I got approved as a member of the media. I remember how ecstatic I was about that and immediately applied for draft credentials because the Suns were going to be a top 5 pick. Went in 2013. They took Alex Len. That didn't really work out. But just being there for that and having the ability to go back and forth between the press room and do some interviews with some separate people and I sat in on a very empty press conference for a young man named Giannis Antetokounmpo and
wow.
Seeing him as a 6'8", 18-year-old that no one had any interest in. And I think that was such a core moment for me too, because you go from his presser where there were maybe 10 people in there and half of them are Greek reporters who are, just interested in the fact that this is the first Greek guy taken in a long time, very high up on the scale. The room immediately becomes packed because the next pick, or at that moment, Brooklyn, with Mikhail Prokhorov, had decided to trade the entire farm to Boston in exchange for Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce.
Oh, right.
So that trade happens on draft night, and all of a sudden, all major media outlets are running down to talk to Billy King, the GM of the Nets at the time, to see, hey, is this team championship caliber now that we have these 2 superstars? And obviously they never got anything done. But to watch a total, ignorance to Giannis, right, who comes on to be the MVP, an NBA champion, etc., and then all of a sudden swarm in for this, what was the biggest story of the night, no question. Every camera set up, all this other stuff, very limited media availability. He has a prepared statement. It was just kind of like night and day that, sometimes what we pay attention to doesn't always really work out. And obviously, who could have known that some 6'8" Greek kid who, there's a lot of...
How were you feeling about Giannis at that time?
Well, I mean, he said all the right things. It was should be cool. Milwaukee was at that point kind of where careers went to die. They had guys like Monte Ellis, etc., who really never got anything done. Brandon Jennings was there too and was touted, but never really got off the ground. Before that, they had Michael Redd, who was a great knockdown shooter too. But I felt like hey, he's got some cool stuff to say. I guess we'll see what happens. You know,
So,
I mean, your guess is as good as anybody else's before they go out there. You know?
So the validation of just that moment, was like big. It brought it all kind of
definitely.
together.
It made me feel like I can do it.
Was that before school? Was that before Syracuse?
Yeah, that was 2013. So
would you say that was like the thing that confirmed, like, okay, well, I'm going to keep pushing this direction. I'm going to go to school for that, or had you known, even if that didn't happen, would you have kept pushing that? Like
I think
you didn't get that validation.
I think it's a great question because I think it's a combination of the two. I also think that, like, for me, I was working with this guy who was trying to start his own freelance sports channel, and he was paying me to host some MMA shows. And granted, I was not getting paid a lot. I was getting paid like $15 a show. But, like, you know, just the fact that someone was like, "Hey, you're good enough to do this."
Getting paid for your work.
Yeah, you were good enough to do this.
How long ago was this?
That was like, I did H4 TV like 2012 to 2014, so that was a couple years.
Like 12, 13 years ago?
Yeah, or so.
That's pretty remarkable.
It was.
Especially since it's not only the NBA, you had that MMA coverage too.
Yeah.
When you really think about the normalization of MMA.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that was a special
Only the
time.
past couple years.
I remember, like, my first assignment for them with that was to write about the Gustafsson-Jones fight, and that was the first one ever. And, like, they were like, we want you to take a take on this. And it was close, but my take was Gus is going to be the first person to beat John.
Wow.
And, like, it's...
and then it was a good fight. So
oh, yeah. I mean, like, one of the best ever. Clout. Yeah, probably. Yeah. And because of that, that was, like, big. And I don't think it, like, bought me clout or whatever, but it also was just like, hey, like, you stood behind an opinion that ended up being like, okay, yeah, this was cool.
This is a convenient segue. Let's move it to the UFC core memory.
Yeah, sure.
Is that it, or is it different?
Yeah, I think it's that. I have two. That, or honestly, I brought a few friends in my apartment in New York who had never watched a UFC fight before, ever. And we watched Max Justin.
Bang!
I mean, come on. Like, what an introduction to the sport for that, right? Like, I mean, like, just to be able to spread that love, that joy, I think is really, really cool because, like, it could have been a, Merab O'Malley fight, which is still cool in its own way, but I think that turns, obviously,
you know
this.
Him over for, like, the best one.
Yeah, literally.
Time. And the entire card was a banger.
It was, yeah, full of a lot of finishes.
I think there was only, like, one fight, and I can't even remember, and it wasn't even that bad.
No, it wasn't.
Great fight on some other cards.
Yeah, and I just think I've always loved being able to spread the joy of whatever moment is there, whether that's with someone we're interviewing or with the casual fan, whatever, to the UFC kind of thing. Those are probably the most core memories, I would say. A tie for third, just because it has like a very and I know this is a weird one, but sitting upstairs in your bedroom watching Yoel Izzy, and just how weird that was. And like,
that was a funny one.
Yeah, well, just how we parroted off of each other, like, what is going to happen here? And with Yoel just showing up like that.
Just standing there.
So crazy. But yeah, I'd probably say the Max Justin fight is like number one with like Izzy number two.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the playing the UFC video games.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Stand up only, right? You can't go to takedowns. No way.
Those are so funny.
No way.
Street rules, UFC. Do you have one for the NHL?
I went to a Stanley Cup game, which was cool. I just got asked on a whim by a friend from Syracuse who happened to have a ticket, so I went up to Pittsburgh. That was really cool. Game 1 against the Sharks. It is kind of crazy. I've been to 3 championships, events. The NHL, I've always been more of a fair-weathered fan. I would say I've definitely spent more time playing the video game than I have, actually watching hockey.
Wow, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a great sport. My cousin plays now, so, I get super invested.
So which event was that exactly? Which teams?
Oh, it was the Penguins and the San Jose Sharks.
Penguins, Sharks.
Stanley Cup final, Game 1.
Game 1.
Penguins win 3-2 in Pittsburgh. Would go on to win the series in 6 games.
Banger.
Yeah, it was great.
Had a good time?
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah, for sure.
What year was that?
15?
Okay.
Yeah, 2015.
Wow.
Maybe 16. No, 15. It was 15 for sure. Nice. Yeah, I still have the ticket at home. It was a cool event.
So. We had to get the NHL out of the way. It's one of the major sports. I'm trying to learn more hockey.
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn more.
I think it's a great game. There's a lot of grit. There's a lot of just tenacity. I mean, what other sport is fighting encouraged besides actual fighting?
Well, I think it takes the most skill in terms of you have to be able to be on ice skates. I literally can't ice skate.
I can limited at best. And yeah, I mean, stick control and especially just the way that the keepers react and how high save percentages are for them. You know,
Yeah.
a good keeper has a save percentage in like the 93-94% range.
Are there like what's the rules with the keeper and like where they are and how big they are and what they're allowed to do? Because sometimes it feels like the box is like this big and then the guy's like in so much armor and he's just like he's just like blocking out the whole thing. Is that like the goal?
Yeah, I mean obviously you want a big body in there, but there's a
that?
lot of keepers that are like just 6 foot, 220 pounds. You know, they don't just put someone out there like Aaron Judge, you know, massive human or whatever to cover all posts, because you have to be really flexible. Your lateral movement has to be super good, at least from what I understand. And my job in Salisbury, you know, we covered a team that was a FHL affiliate, which is like the lowest level of professional hockey, but you know, they had a guy in net, Trevor Martin, who was like 5'11" and like was just so springy. Like he was the best player on the team because he was just so, his ability to, you know, have that quickness to adjust and, you know that the pass is coming right across, you know, or getting centered or whatnot, and then he could like get there. And obviously your hand-eye coordination has to be really good too.
Are they like the only person allowed in
the crease? Yeah,
okay.
Pretty much. I mean, and like guys can skate into the crease, or like, you know, like let's say you're on the offensive team, like you can have someone block the keeper, like stand in his way, obstruct his vision, etc. It's a great strategy. It's used all the time, but you can't have someone actually interacting, putting a body on him unless they are hit into him by one of his defenders.
My brother-in-law is a big hockey guy, so I'm gonna start trying to get into it.
Yeah, it's great. You know, look, it's clearly like 4 in terms of the big 4, like in terms of viewed and popularity and whatnot. But I think the NHL postseason is like up there with any of the other big postseasons for sure.
All right, MLB.
I think just going. This is. I went to a Pirates playoff game when they had that awesome run in like 2012, 2013. But I think. Yeah, I think my ultimate memory though is just going to Camden Yards. I just think there's such a love of like the game there, and like there isn't a bad seat in the house. Like you can buy a $6 ticket and feel like, you know, you're living a life of luxury there. Like it's just, the views are incredible. The stadium's well designed.
It's always voted like a top 5 or top 10 stadium, right? Especially
most definitely.
in terms of iconicism. Yeah,
and I think also just in terms of you know, clearly they haven't had the most formidable product, but you go and you feel like this is America's pastime. Like when you're there, like, you know, people are having a great time.
And they have been good for a while. Like I would say better than not the last decade.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, last season was clearly a huge push for them. This year they had a big regression year, end up finishing last in the AL East, you know, trade away a ton of pieces, including Cedric Mullins, who had been like such a cornerstone of the team. But I think a lot of memories have been made in Baltimore for sure, for me, from a perspective of just enjoying the game and being a part of it. That's definitely really cool.
All right. Now it's the big one. NFL.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to prime it, you know?
Yeah, sure.
Because I feel like I know what it probably is, what the core memory is.
Yeah.
But I want to even build into that moment, the context of the previous year. Was that a big moment for you watching the Patriots Giants Super Bowl?
Yeah, it was definitely really cool.
Did that build in a fervor for the NFL? Because that was a pretty insane game.
It was, for sure. I had always been a big football fan, like, growing up. So, like, not to totally date myself or whatever, but we lived in Pittsburgh for the first 7 years of my life, 6-7 years of my life. You know, my parents have a lot of memories of me, like, my first words besides being mom and dad were like Pittsburgh Steelers, Washington Redskins. Like, it was kind of ingrained in me super young. I had Madden 2000. That was like a, you know, PC staple for me, you know, back on the old Dell PC kind of thing. Probably the first video game I ever played. I dressed up as like Brett Favre and John Elway for Halloween. Like, it was like culture for me. Like, it really was growing up. And like, I'm not trying to embarrass myself, but like my dad has 5 sisters and he would have a few of them come over or whatever. Yeah, crazy. But they would come over and they always loved to recount these memories where I would have this little play set and I would be on the phone with John Elway like all the time and like, you know, doing stuff like that. So like football is like Americana for me. Like it is like, you know, Sundays are huge, etc. Like it's part of like our growing up and our lifestyle. the core memory for sure for me, because it means so much from a family perspective and because they won, going to Super Bowl 43 was just incredible. I mean, it has to be. I mean, even over my Sports Illustrated for Kids, like working the draft and doing stuff like that, like we thought my dad was dead to rights like a year earlier, like really, really negative outlook with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then for him to kind of make this huge health turnaround, and then him to get back and just basically be like, you know what, screw it, we're going to go to the game. And we did, and that was like kind of a perfect age to go. I was like 12, 13. Springsteen did the halftime show. You know, that was pretty cool. I obviously, like at 12, didn't know a single Bruce Springsteen song. I was more akin to like Fall Out Boy and Green Day and whatever. But yeah, just that was so special for us from a perspective of like a real family bonding moment, and also, you know, clearly them getting the win in one of the greatest Super Bowls ever. Is just
if
awesome.
not the greatest, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, James Harrison's pick six, like we thought he was out of bounds. We had a great view. We were on that right side of the sideline to see Holmes get his feet down for that catch. Like we both knew he was there even when they reviewed it. Like, we were just so hyped.
Because that's maybe the top. I mean, at least 2 of the top 5 plays in NFL history: the Harrison fumble recovery,
definitely,
the touchdown, the Santonio.
Oh my God, yeah. In terms of Super Bowl history, absolutely.
And Kurt Warner was slinging it too.
He was.
Like they weren't going crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Fitzgerald was like leading an incredible campaign. Like I think if the Cardinals had won that game, people would have looked back to Fitz's performance. He probably would have won MVP over Kurt, being totally honest, just because of how dominant he was, and like every ball that was thrown his way was caught. Yeah, that's like core, you know, ultimate memory for me. But I think like a consistent core, like especially when I lived in New York, you know, or was at Syracuse or whatever, was just like getting together with people to like sit down, watch Scott Hansen, or, you know, we've done that too. Or, you know, just having the opportunity to like go to a tailgate. Like for me, it's so much about the community aspect of the NFL. And that's why I think it works, you know. I mean, it's one game a week, you know, for every single squad, kind of makes things super consumable, but also gives you that 3 to 4 hour window of, hey, like I'm going to watch this now or whatever. So I think it's great. I always have. Clearly they have issues like any other sports league, whatever. But for me, like, and also in my job, so like NFL was king, like always. Like it has the highest share of the viewer share. It by far commands the most. When I worked in sports betting, it commands the most handle in sports betting by a long shot. Like I want to say that like of all sports wagers that will be made in America this year, like 70 to 75% are on the NFL.
Wow.
Where like, you know, like another 15% are reserved for college football, and then the rest is spread out between baseball and basketball, and college basketball primarily. But yeah, it's just, it's always been a part of life for me. And I've definitely had points where I've been a little checked out on it. I think the Steelers hanging around pretty much every year, giving us, you know, winning seasons, has been like a reason for me to keep watching. It's obviously infuriating when they've been dusted in the playoffs and whatever.
Well, it's funny because I was talking to Alex the other day, and it's that initial like family reflection, you know, something that you love often spurs you on to keep chasing it. And that was my experience too for acting. It's like I would do my little acting things in front of family. And that was the case for Preet, and you know, that with you. It's like it instills that connection, and then you also have that moment where you reflect in front of like friends or family, or not for friends, or like another audience of some sort. You know, you expand that out. Do you have a core memory of that, of the first time that you were gaining recognition from friends or strangers for those sort of things?
Yeah.
And like wanting to be in that position of garnering attention or talking about things or making jokes?
Yeah, I think it's definitely about the performance aspect for me too. Maybe you aligned similarly with Alex also. I mean, it's I feel like it has such a, you know, powerful ability to be able to move somebody to emotion, right? Like whether that's, I mean, I didn't play many serious roles that were worthy of like, wow, I'm crying my eyes out over this person or whatever, but I think those, like, you know, especially the comedic stuff, you know, that was something that you and I really hung on to. You know, when I think of like the core kind of incepting memory from it, like we did a musical in 5th grade. You know, I was the lead. It was awesome. It was like a Monty Python superhero kind of thing. Almost. Oh yeah? Yeah, it was cute. I forget. Oh, The Adventures of a Comic Book Artist, I think is what it's called.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it was cool. I think
remember the songs?
I remember the chorus, like I don't know what you would call that, but like the anchor song, right?
Go
Whatever.
ahead and sing it in its totality.
I want to be an artist, a comic book artist. That's where my heart is. That's the life for me.
Wow.
That's all I got. That's it.
See, it's amazing how deeply ingrained those things are.
Yeah, totally.
When you're young.
Yeah, they're like life movers. They like what, inspire you to try to chase that kind of dream. I mean, it's so easy, I think, to lock on to the highly successful, the super outliers, Denzel, whomever else is, you think is really great or whatever. But there's thousands of people that participate in community theater every day that don't get their flowers and are still really great. And I think that's what is so special about experiences like that. Like, my most recent kind of run-in with it was a friend's girlfriend was part of the Second City Improv Troupe in New York.
Oh, wow.
So went up and saw them and just seeing like the way that people kind of worked in the moment. And some sketches don't land and some things don't land, whatever. But, those moments that really get you up, you're like, that's what we walked in the door for, was that.
Well, it's an interesting thing, right? Being funny. It's like people tend to be born and they have this like uninhibited sense of self, right, where they go and put themselves out in front of people to gain approval. And then as you get older, you start like reflecting more on how people treat you and stuff, and you round out that understanding of the human condition. And it's like then you have to kind of find that space to inhabit both the uninhibited self that can attract joy, like that childlike expression, but then also have that nuance to have, real takes on things and perspective on things. And, because it's interesting, if you see just the uninhibited joy devoid of the perspective, it's like alienating. Like, I was always averse to the idea of getting successful too young. Not to say that I'm successful, but like I had no desire to be in stand-up comedy in my early 20s, because I was like I wouldn't want to hear what I had to say if I was somebody that was like me but older. You know what I mean? Like if I was me but older, I wouldn't have wanted to hear me but younger, like in my early 20s talking.
But I think
I feel like talking and perspective granting is like something that tends to get better over time.
Yeah, it totally can, but I also think like similarly, and I don't want to like draw too much of a tangent to this, but similarly to sport, like the best guys play. You got 10, 15-year veterans in the NBA that are sitting the bench to 19-year-olds. And it's not because those, kids have this, that, or the other. It's because they can do it. And I think if you have the perspective or the talent to be able to do it, like you should. Like, I think one of the most interesting things right now is the SNL cast for this upcoming season incorporating a number of people who don't have traditional comedic backgrounds. You have for example, Cam Patterson, who's coming from, a stand-up world, but is largely, a Kill Tony benefactor. You have, I'm dropping her name right now, but, digital content creators who have built sketch comedy, who are now getting recognized at arguably the highest platform of, of not sitcom television, but live comedy, sketch, whatever kind of things.
I see you in a unique position, though, where your field is like predicated on those inherent values of a storyteller. Rather than the exhibitionist sort of like actor archetype. Where like you're in a field where people tend to just get better and better and better and better and better as they get older, because they can offer more and more perspective.
For sure. Absolutely.
And I think that that's a good way for us to foray into the first of these cards I've got. You ever do those blind rankums?
Yeah, this is cool. I haven't done one of these in a while, but yeah.
All right. This is a blind rankum for sports commentators.
Oh, okay. I like this already.
All
cool.
Right, 1 to
How
5.
many? 1 to 5? Okay, cool. All right.
Gus Johnson.
Oh, man. Gus has iconic calls. I'm like, it's hard to know with the rest of this list, but he holds a special place. I would say that people would say that he's not reverence in terms of the traditional, but I think the hype he brings is so good. Let's put him at 3.
3.
Yeah.
Bill Simmons.
I'm a hater. 5. Yeah, for sure. I think Bill Simmons is the original fanboy. With no disrespect, he is the independent sports journalist who has created the greatest return on his investment. He has a lot of storied legacy, etc. But find me some really great perspective from him that isn't about Boston. Like it's not easy. And granted, he did an NBA preview show with Jalen Rose for a number of years that I thought was really good and a deep delve into everything. And I took a lot of creative inspiration from that. But He's the original Homer, so 5. Yeah.
Okay. You heard it here, folks.
Yes.
All right, Phil Simms.
I'll put Phil at 4. I think like he is a great color commentator. He isn't like someone that moves the ultimate needle in terms of like history and story for me, but I think that he especially does a great job of breaking down the quarterback position for that reason. Yeah.
Mike Tirico.
Mike's a good guy. He really is. He looked out for, a lot of people at Syracuse, took time with a lot of us there. Game 7 of the World Series between the Indians and the Cubs. He took us out for food because we were all on student radio, so he's always got a special place in my heart, and had linked with him years prior at the U.S. Open when I was a kid for SI. I'll put Mike at 1. I think he's
nice.
I think he's just
nice.
Yeah, of that list so far, that feels confident to put him at 1.
Well, you know what that does? That avoids you putting Max Kellerman at 1. So Max Kellerman will take 2.
Well, look, Max is awesome. Incredible story. Nice. I like this. I think I think people were really heavily critical of him, by the way, on the Crawford-Canelo fight, and I don't really understand why. He might have had some moments where he was rambling, etc., but like he has such good insight into like all these guys' backgrounds, the history of the moment, etc. John was great on it too.
Yeah,
obviously, but
I saw Ariel mentioning that he thought that Max Kellerman was doing a good job.
Yeah, I thought he was spectacular,
especially up in the build up to that main fight. Not necessarily in the main fight, but
and that booth got a bad rap because of the very end when Anik is like looking at them and they're all looking at the camera, and it's like, all right, just classic misdirection. It's not a big deal. Like they think like they're gonna come out on that cam instead of being there. So whatever, but I thought it was great. Also, that fight was pretty sweet.
Well, it's funny because it shows how boxing's kind of built on pomp and circumstance, even to this day, whereas the UFC's kind of been built on like levity.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think like just the depth of the damage in the UFC is more significant. Like, look, like whether you're Dana White or a casual fan, you want to see finishes, you want to see knockouts, and they don't happen in boxing. Like, find me a boxing main event that's been so prolific that ended in a KO. Like, very few. Like, I'm struggling to think of any.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like some Deontay Wilder fights, or like, maybe like didn't Ruiz knock out Anthony Joshua or whatever? But like,
yeah. Well, what happened did someone get knocked out in that one of those Ryan Garcia fights?
Yeah.
I can't remember. No, I don't even know there. I'm not sure, but I'm not the one to ask about boxing. I wish if we had Mike here, he'd be able to say more.
I think it's just always.
I can't pull
and this is maybe for me because
I'm not a huge boxing guy.
Yeah, and I'm not either because I've been more in tune to the characters, I think, that come out of, the UFC, and I think there's always a lot of like crossover, obviously, and it very like it usually is the top strikers. Let's see if they can box. McGregor and Ngannou, obviously, being the two big ones, but like, there's very little discussion of like, hey, Floyd's in his prime. Is he going to go fight, Joe Benavidez or Dominic Cruz? No way. Like, absolutely not. Like,
well, there is some talk about if Bud Crawford might come over and fight somebody.
That would be cool. We could see that as a total cash grab, though.
That could happen.
But even still, like, the cash grab usually goes the other way. I don't know how boxing has the purses that they do, but they do.
They have it somehow. Well, we were talking about John Anik just there.
Yeah.
And what do you think of John Anik? You're a big fan of his, right? Do you find him as an inspiration in terms of style?
I think he's really crisp and clean. I think he's super, just he knows how to come in with the right amount of preparation. Like, for example, I've called fights. I've called a lot of them. I've done like 15 cards or so, which like
play-by-play as well.
Yeah, which is not a lot, but like a significant amount to be able to say, hey, like,
and like all play-by-play, right?
Yeah, and ring announce too. Sometimes 2 and 1. Yeah, but most of the time just play-by-play. I would come in with like 2 pages on every guy so that we're ready for everything, kind of thing. But if you look at his prep that he so publicly demonstrates, he's got a note card. That's it. Last 5 fight history, 2-3 facts to roll through, and then he knows from having conversations with these guys about what's actually important to talk about at a given moment. And there's obviously sometimes, both these fighters have dealt with custody problems with their children. Like, I think
the reveals.
Yeah, he can get dragged over the coals for that or some other stuff. But I think in his ability also to call the big moment is really great. Like, yeah, maybe he was quote unquote setting up the Leon knockout, so to speak. That's not the cloth that he is cut from. But
that's a great one.
I think everything is really done extremely polished there. The UFC has a good commentary team top to bottom. I think Brandon Fitzgerald is good. I think he, sometimes is. It shows that maybe he hasn't had the same depth in the sport, but he has come a long way, continues to train the same way as John Gooden does. I think that their commentary team is pretty sweet.
Do you think that your style's been more influenced by a John Anik or a Mauro Ranallo? Because I feel like you're somewhere in between those styles.
Yeah. If I had to pick, I'd probably pick John because I was very cognizant of this, and I've done this now the last couple times, but I did this especially in the Canelo fight. When he would start talking, I would start counting. How long is he talking for? And it's very rarely over 6-7 seconds. Very rarely.
John?
Yeah, very
succinct.
rarely. It's very to the point, deliver, etc. Crawford comes out, strong right hand, under 2 minutes to go, round 3. Bang, off. Give commentators the ability to do their job. And I think that's what's so good, and that's like what makes really great play-by-play commentators is they become the LeBron, so to speak, of making other people really great all around them. And that's, I think, what
You're
John
like the
does
director of the conversation.
Yeah, that's what John does super, super well. And there were moments where, Max and, whoever else was in the booth who I'm dropping now, we're kind of just going back and forth for over a minute, and then he would interject, like, solid right hand gets through from Canelo, 30 seconds to go, those kinds of calls.
Building the structure for the viewer.
Yeah, precisely. And, I feel like he never says too much of the obvious either. Like, we're watching. We know as fight fans. But sometimes it's integral, to throw in that extra context, right? Like, there's a big left hand from Smith, Coaches have been emphasizing his ability to close the distance, stay in the pocket, and throw those hooks out, All
right, I have a prompt for you.
Cool.
Can you do a John Anik as a lawyer defending his client against a bad stoppage?
Against a bad stoppage, so his client's a referee in this instance.
I was thinking the client was a fighter, but if you wanted to do it,
okay, so a fighter that has been knocked out that is protesting a bad stoppage.
Yes.
Okay, I see. All right, this requires some thinking for a second. Your Honor, my client went down in the second round, and it is not to be seen. This is so hard already. Went down in the second round. That barrage of punches was weak. That was terrible. Just being honest.
Your Honor, I believe his hands were up. He was still trying.
He was working to his base, building up slowly but surely. Now I'm like thinking of his intros to any card. That's like where I'm at with that.
All right, what about Marv Albert ordering a pizza?
Wow. Okay, that one's going to be a little bit easier. I have always had the little prowess for the Marv Albert impression, although we got to prep our throat before I blow it out right here. Yes, hello, is this Siciliano's? I would like to order one large meat lover's pizza, and if it could be delivered in the next hour, that would be fantastic. Extra cheese for $1? Yes, I'll take it.
There it is. I was wondering if you were going to go there with the yes to confirm an option.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Debit or credit? I'll have to go with my new Visa MasterCard. There's two credit companies.
The plug. I meant to write a third prompt. Generally, these things run in threes.
Yeah, that's okay.
I couldn't think of one.
That's a beautiful little segment, though. I like that. It's a nice interjection.
Yeah, I've got a couple more, but I'm not sure which one we should jump into next.
Fire away.
We were talking about the UFC.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll jump into this one because it's a question of a UFC nature. So recently, we had a high-level contest between two top-flight middleweight contenders, Nasruddin Imavov and Caio Borralho.
Yeah.
For the folks watching at home, can you just briefly describe who Nasruddin Imavov is, who Caio Borralho is, what fighting is, why people fight, what people are, the story of how people came here and how you think it might come to an end.
Okay.
Well, and as succinct a way as you can.
In the beginning, we were all fish swimming around in the water. Imavov. God, and it's always hard to say his name, too. That was the hard name fight. Probably would have been a little bit worse with some other guys, but definitely he was up there. Imavov is a high-level grappler who also has this incredible ability to stand and bang. I guess that's the most succinct way that I can put it with him.
Okay.
He has tasted defeat early in his career, but has bounced back to put together a winning streak that has basically made him worthy of a championship contention fight. Kyle Baralho, in my mind, is somebody who trained in the great game of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but has now also put together these rock-hard hands of his. Has become a part of a growing group of nerdy Brazilians that are really standing out in their own way.
It's funny, I wrote this prompt before they all
banded together and started putting the glasses on and losing. That's true.
Yeah, no, like a month ago.
Yeah.
I thought of this, but then...
But I will say this, I think the fact that they are losing to elite challengers is more indicative
they shouldn't feel bad.
No, not at all. And what? Baralho's got, 2-3 losses now? Tops? That's it? I think he will be back in a big way. But these are guys that both stand in front and put pressure on, I think is the commonality of the two of them. And that's why that's kind of like what we saw outside of that opening round where there was a lot of feeling each other out, even though still some good clash. They are the two. Why?
What fighting is.
Yeah, what fighting is an act between either groups of people or one person. That involve conflict.
Internal struggle within.
Yeah, they internalize weapons. They could either be constructed like tools, or they are using their limbs and appendages in whatever methods necessary to get it done. Some fights are without rules or a set of standards. Combat, a street fight for your life. Others are sanctioned and have certain things you can and cannot do. I believe next was people.
Well, that actually covered why. Yeah, you covered why people fight. Yeah, and then what people are.
Well, okay.
People are.
Well, I'll also backtrack to why people fight. It is over usually a differing of interests, cultural drivers or reasons, societal gain, occasionally out of hate and despair.
So like environmental factors.
Yes, which also applies to the one-on-one sanction fights. There may be fights out of hate. There may be fights out of monetary purposes, to obtain money, to advance oneself. Yes, to advance oneself. But fighting is also, we feel like, should be said here before we get into the people thing, or further into it. Animals fight, plants fight, different kinds of fungi compete, for given spaces. It is a natural part of our existence in its most gruesome and poetic form.
Wow. So fighting is a very natural thing.
Yes and no. It is not appropriate to walk up to someone and punch them in the face. It is a product of human evolution over time that fighting is a natural
and what humans are.
Humans are, in today's form, I am a believer in the evolution theory championed by Charles Darwin, so I do believe that humans have evolved over time. Humans are a direct descendant, potentially, of millions of years of evolution, starting with fish swimming around in the water, and they
on top of the thermal vents and such.
Yes, exactly, and they, at least to our knowledge, evolve into greater species that eventually go on land, and on top of that, they have become a deviation in species on Earth, of many of which whose primary focus is to reproduce and pass on genetic traits to the next generation. They are also now they are creating forms of what we like to know as civilization, creating things such as art, all manner
of things.
Yes, all manner of things that range not just from biological impulse, but also gaze upon us a greater question of why we are here, what is our purpose, etc. We have developed a greater cognitive dissonance than, say, a bug.
Yes, we're able to be
and
confounded by
we love the
our own
bugs.
minds.
If any of the bugs are watching, we got you. It's all good. You know,
Yes.
shout out the praying mantis. And
We're holding it down for them.
We
and
are.
then I think the last section of there, how do you think it all comes to an end?
Oh man, I don't really know. I mean, there's like a lot of there multiple times there have been mass extinction events that are beyond what humans are at least capable of now to be able to sustain. I do believe, by the way, that if there was ever an asteroid or meteor or something that, like, unless it was so Earth-sized in totality, we probably have enough gusto to be able to at least minimize the damage that we could incur. But I think, there's a lot of ways. Nuclear fallout, which clearly we got close to, but never really happened. A mass extinction event in terms of a global heating or cooling event that we just can't control whatsoever. And even then, I think some people could still survive that.
Yeah.
But for what time period and to what lengths? Like, is it even worth it? And then there's also just, the eventual reality that one day our star will die as every other one's do, and therefore, that will effectively be the end of biologic life as we know it within the at least Milky Way solar system,
How do you think
our solar system.
How do you think you'd do in a zombie apocalypse?
Pretty well. I've thought about this a lot. We have a good outpost, I think, in our home to be able to sustain. I worry more often about food. There's only so many deer out there that you can kill, and so many canned goods you can use, and how much of the land are we actually tilling and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think it depends also. Are they fast? Are they slow?
It does. It very much depends.
Is it
on the
Walking
narrative
Dead-esque?
universe.
Where everyone is infected, and like when you go, you become infected regardless?
Is that how it is?
In that series, it is. Yeah, they come to this realization through interacting with the scientists in the CDC in Atlanta that like everyone, it's like the end of the first season, I think.
Okay.
Where they realize that like there is no cure, like we are all infected and like we will all succumb to this fate kind of thing. I think it's probably not realistic from a perspective of like them becoming so, like later in The Walking Dead where I jump off is like where they become human zombies, like the zombies are capable of wielding a weapon or things like that.
Yes.
I think if the brain is so deformed eventually, like we've learned from other things that like that runs out, whether that's like mad cow disease or like the infective parasites that we've seen take over insects, so to speak, and drive them to different things. Like eventually all those things come to an end. I mean, our time is finite.
Yeah, there's something like it's like chronic wasting disease. Is there something like that that's like some sort of zombie something?
Yeah, for sure.
Affecting
For sure.
deer.
But I will say I really hope that if they do come around, they are more the speed of The Walking Dead versus like something like
28 days
Yeah,
later
it was
or
just
something.
about to say.
Yeah,
Yeah, where
that would be
they
bad.
are literally Usain Bolt, all of them.
Wow.
So yeah, my cardio is fine at best. So, and they do say that in Zombieland, that's rule 1 is cardio. But yeah,
I was
It's a
thinking
cool-
of rewatching Shaun of the Dead recently.
so good. I have a pint at the Winchester. Wait for this all to blow over. So good. I mean, talk about the only really good comedy zombie movie.
Yeah, I was watching the
Zombieland is too, but like it's
Yeah.
a different kind of comedy.
It came across my feed, the long take where he's like walking to the store. they did that twice, and I was like, wow, I'm curious to go rewatch it because it's been a long time.
What do you think would happen?
In the event of a zombie apocalypse?
Yeah, would you do okay? I feel like you would.
I think
We
I
have a
would do
natural
pretty good.
prowess for combat and survival. I also think that like I don't know if you have firearms, but I feel like that's a succinct advantage. We've seen that like, hey, if you killed a head in basically any zombie, they kind of
Yes. Well, if it comes to that, we have some munitions for sure. But at the same time, I think the biggest thing is just your maneuverability in social situations and knowing who to trust and having that skill of discernment. Mm-hmm. Because in a sense, it's already that zombie apocalypse in that there's dangers all around,
Yeah, for
of
sure.
people who are unthinking.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you get caught up in a situation where you're met with someone who's in that, you could be subjected to violence.
Yeah, and I mean,
danger.
yeah, and we've also seen it like I think of, and this is gruesome to bring up, but I think of a a video that was taken by a civilian in Owings Mills of, a guy who apparently was high on bath salts and was like pressing towards a police officer and basically ate an entire magazine to the chest before like dropping down.
Oh my God.
It's a horrific video. But like, yeah, that's like what I think about. Less from a drug-induced standpoint sometimes, but I think that like those things do tend to make people a little bit crazy. Like there are certain things in our society that like drug use that are problematic to the individual, but don't often result in like, that kind of thing. Like someone who's an alcoholic isn't like, most alcoholics are not going out and absorbing 5 to 6 bullets and still coming after you.
Yeah. So. Well, it is very interesting. Like, do you find yourself when you're out in public, like keeping your head on a swivel? Or do you feel like you sometimes let your guard down?
I let my guard down. I'll be totally honest. Yesterday was Yom Kippur. It was, the Jewish Day of Atonement. And, my temple, which meets at a Universal Unitarian Church, which is like open to, all faiths that practice there as long as they, pay them, rent it out, whatever. We had a police officer on hand, but I think just given like the rise in violence and people's extremism, I think that those kinds of things are always kind of like, I was definitely a little bit more like head on a swivel there for that. But I think like going to the grocery store, I don't really think about it, even though maybe you're just as susceptible there as you are anywhere else. But well, I think it's important to be safe and kind of, I've always been a big proponent of like eject from conflict. Like there was an instance in Salisbury where like I was kind of in the middle of a big fight between people I was there with and other people, and it was like getting away from that context, and like, granted the only thing that flew were fists and whatever, so it was pretty safe. But at that same establishment, people had been stabbed before, people had been shot, those kinds of things, and I think a lot of it is also kind of environmental and whatnot. But I think it's important to be vigilant. Like, how could it not be? I also think, we have, and I don't emphasize this too strongly, but I think it is real. I think as men, we have a bit more of a perspective of like, we do feel more safe with regularity. Like, I know a lot of women that are routinely terrified to go anywhere by themselves.
And also have like, should feel some duty to be vigilant.
Yeah, I agree. And like, and that kind of goes with standing up for what's right, and like, also at the same time, like protecting yourself. And like, I think there are a lot of instances where like maybe we've romanticized like being the hero or like, whatever. And it's like heroism is, not often as redeeming as we think. People get caught or whatever. But yeah, I think it's important to say though at the same time that I regularly feel safe, especially in our community. Yeah. Like I just feel like it's pretty even keel here, and like I think that violent crime is super rare in Frederick. Like it just is. And usually it's somebody, like I know that somebody was killed by police in front of Old Mother Brewing Company, I think, a little while ago. Yeah, he was like basically had a suicide death wish from what I understood, and
death by cop.
Yeah, chose
or
that.
Suicide by cop.
Yeah, pretty much.
Had a knife or something.
But yeah, but do you feel safe here? Like I feel fine most of the time.
So for me, I don't consider myself like agoraphobic or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I'm I have a charisma and stuff, and I'm not like afraid of being out and about. But I do have a sense of unease just about the general public, because I feel like my understanding of the human condition is that those variables do occur in all strata. Of life, all divisions.
Yeah, for sure.
However many you could make, there's going to be those outlier people in terms of behavior and personality type that are disconnected with reality.
Totally.
And I feel like if people aren't like always aware of that, that's how you end up in that situation.
Yeah, for sure, certainly. But I think like, by the same token, like you go to work, I go to work, whatever, and like there are inherent dangers, I think, that like obviously exist from those people, but I think we also do a lot of things that like are inherently dangerous that we don't think are, right? Like driving a car is the primary example. Like we lose 60,000 people a year in this country to car deaths, and it's like, but you don't get in your car and think this may be the last trip I ever take. Like,
well, it's funny though, because there is like, I was thinking about this earlier. I saw this post of this like nurse who was driving, but she's like texting and she goes off the road. I don't know if you've seen that one, but someone said, how could she like not know what she was doing, or why was she crying? Like she didn't know what she was doing. I was like, She knows what she was doing. She knows she shouldn't be speeding. She knows she shouldn't be on her phone while she's driving.
Yeah.
And she's coping with the reality of all of these factors like being the case, and it leads to like a mental break, like
yeah, totally.
Just the inflict of being behind the wheel, being in this state of information overload. It's like life really is disproportionately for the competent, because
totally.
if you're not able to be like constantly vigilant and aware that you could at any moment lose everything.
Yeah.
Everything could be gone. Everything could change.
And that's why a lot of our driving instruction is taught the way that it is, right? You stay 2 car lengths behind somebody. You're very careful when you merge. You're looking to put the turn signal on. You look again, kind of things. Stop at the stop sign. You look this way, that way, whatever. I mean, we try to implement those to the best of our ability. Clearly, they're called accidents for a reason. It can be anything as simple as a fender bender to whatever. But I think that I think the car is like the first thing that I cite all the time as like, something that's inherently dangerous that we maybe don't treat as so. And look, I've been guilty of like, checking something on my phone when I really shouldn't when I'm on the highway or whatever. I think that's part of like the
and it's like
condition.
This like internal like what am I doing? Like,
yeah,
you have to like scream yourself. Sometimes like I'll literally be on the road and I have to like smack myself to literally jostle like, hey, don't ever fucking even get the inclination to look at the phone.
Yeah, and that's good. That's good. I think a lot
takes
of
like 1 second.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that do other reckless stuff on the road too. Whether that's like, dude, I've seen someone on the highway like applying makeup. I've seen like somebody on the highway like an old guy like reading a newspaper. Like it's like. I don't know, but like people do what is quote unquote safe to them until the very moment that it is not safe, and then that usually is either a wake up call or they become a repeat offender, or it is a permanent wake up call in terms of they cease to exist or they end up with some absolutely terrible accident too.
Yeah, I guess the way I see it is just that knowing that the potential is there for people to either be on that spectrum of disillusionment with reality or on that spectrum of incompetency behind the situations that could be dangerous, where it lends me to be like, okay, well, where people congregate the most are the places I generally don't want to be. I just need like a lot of justification to want to be in places where there's a lot of people, because it just increases the odds you're going to run into one of those situations. Yeah,
I agree with that. I also think at the same time, there is a tendency to focus on a lot of the horror within mass events, etc. Like I was talking the other day, I had no idea about this, but a close family friend of ours was at the Vegas shooting of the country music concert from the Mandalay Bay. Yeah, and like how much that experience kind of not necessarily damage them because they're out in the public and they go to mass sporting events and congregations whatever of people, etc. I think it's easy to look at those as like a microcosm of what can go wrong, but we also have to remember that like every day festivals happen, people are out and about, like in the streets. Frederick, for example, like basically gets the entire town downtown in a very small area, and generally that is very safe, where I think the most heinous crime that's going on there is like theft or like pickpocket, whatever kind of thing. And even then we don't have a lot of that in America, which is kind of great, but we do have theft, but like in a different way.
We generally have a high trust society. I think we're living in the remnants of incredibly high trust society, and I think most of the crimes generally been isolated to population centers, disproportionately. Like if you take the cities out of the equation, the USA skyrockets to like one of the safest countries in the world.
No, agreed with that, and I think that is, there's a cultural predication behind that. There's also there's a lot of struggle culture that allows, and that's what kind of breeds, in my mind, the total disillusioned people that you talk about, where they feel like their only impact is to kill or commit violence or large scale wrongdoing of people, which can be nonviolent too. But I think that those are the things that like I cling to, but I generally, I feel really safe, and like I also try not to like adopt a victim mindset of like people are going to be targeting me because of X, Y, or Z. It's like if I meet someone on the street, generally like they are pleasant to me, and that's like
no, and I don't even think that it's any necessary specific factor outside of the accumulation of all of those people in those places why the population centers are the way that they are. I think it's just a byproduct of like the natural friction you get between people if you stack them up on top of each other.
That can definitely partially be true. I think
because you experienced that firsthand. You lived in New York for years.
Which is a total melting pot, despite having violent crime and whatnot, which some people can say is like skyrocketing, etc. Other people who, don't live in those boroughs or, aren't a part of that kind of scene don't really, see it the same way. But there's, in a place like New York too, there's just like, there's so many people and unfortunately so many mentally ill people that are not treated or, reassessed or, placated in a situation where they can succeed. Instead, they kind of fall victim. I mean, the first problem is massive drug use to scale there, with the, mentally incapacitated. I mean, like I saw like some of the most crazy drugs being, self-administered to people, whether that be heroin or, crack, etc. But ultimately, it's still a drop in the bucket to the total populace of that place. And, I think that it's a valid criticism to say that like there are issues within a lot of places like that. There certainly are, whether they be political or cultural or whatnot. But at the same time, like there's a lot of like progress and natural kind of human.
I did mean to ask beforehand if you wanted to go into any of that territory related to anything like current events or politics, possibly.
Yeah, like a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
within general stance.
Just because that one is an interesting one where we're at, New York. What do you think about the potential for the election of socialist potentially?
So I understand why people are the way that they are geared in terms of. I think a lot of New Yorkers want to see change, and I think the first thing on the mind of every New Yorker right now, without a doubt, is the cost of living, is the cost of, being able to stay in the neighborhood that, their families grew up in, etc. And I'm not even talking about like some of the more, super diverse boroughs, etc. Like take Arthur Ave, for example, in the Bronx, which has historically been a massive Italian community, right? Like those people have been driven out, like a lot of this in Italian ancestral heritage, because of rising cost of living, and that's the biggest thing. So I think when someone like Mamdani comes along, like, and promises like a more affordable way to do that, holding landlords accountable, providing public works for people, it sounds of appeal. Clearly, I don't agree with a lot of his rhetoric. My biggest thing is, how do you get it done? Right? Like I don't even like, I think some of the ideas are great. Like people have a big backlash against the city sponsored grocery stores. But if you go there and eggs are 99 cents a dozen, like, are people really going to care if it's, from the state, as long as it's like sourced from a place that is at least healthy and it's affordable to people? I think that that's what they prioritize first. But I also think that, you're going to have, like, we just know how it works, right? Like the lobbyist organizations, et cetera, are going to make sure that none of that stuff ever takes flight until he's 3 years into the term and then looking for re-election, and then he gets voted out because nothing actually happens. And I think that that's a huge divide that we have in terms of our, legislative and executive branch, especially, is that things take time and there's limits on, representatives, et cetera, that make sure that their policies don't take effect, one way or the other, or there's massive gridlocking, filibustering, et cetera, to just make sure that things don't come to light and that things stay the way. And that's why I was a huge proponent of, the idea, at least in 2016, of Trump getting elected from the perspective of like taking money out of, Washington. Has that happened? I don't really know if you could say that. We still have lobbying committees on full fronts, et cetera, those kinds of things. But I'm always very intrigued, because I think that like a dialogue of ideas is what brings about, actual, sort of progress, or as much as one can be made. But I think if you've ever lived in New York, or like obviously are there now, you are keeping such a close eye on this race, because like we realistically there are three candidates that will realistically garner a lot of votes. Like, people may not think so, but Andrew Cuomo will get a lot of votes there, running as an independent, certainly. Eric Adams had huge backlash against him, but some people are so anti-Mamdani, that I talked to, that they're willing to vote for Eric Adams because they just think, they see the kind of, socialist policies, et cetera, or they just think that a lot of it is pie in the sky, would be the way that I would classify myself with him. And obviously, there's rhetoric and certain sound bites that get played of, whatever social views they hold. But I think that New York is in a really, really weird place for any of that. And I think that, a lot of, people, especially the young voters, are going to be a huge swing in this election in that capacity. It's certainly super interesting because like it operates as like they are kind of a litmus test for a super diversified community and how they, go about their politics. If you look at like, especially Board of Education or et cetera, other social programs, obviously heavily liberal, et cetera. And some of those people have done great. Some of them have not. But I think that there's also just like, there's this kind of feeling that like for people that the economic hardship has been so significant that like something needs to change. Like, and I think that's what you get when people.
So do you think in terms of like the experiment angle of it, it would justify the potential for him to be elected?
Yeah, I mean it justifies the potential.
When they were first doing this all, and the people who were running as independents and all this, it was like, well, they're splitting the vote in such a way it seems that he's certain to win. And then they kind of had the bench press incident, and his numbers went down a little bit. Isn't it funny how fickle politics are?
Yeah, for sure.
It's like that guy where he was like, yeah.
Well, there was a time in America where like, the very littlest thing kind of got you disqualified, right? Like, I mean, there were, you had to be really steadfast and true and keep your nose pretty much as clean as possible in order to be able to pass things on. I mean, like, you look at somebody, especially from a New York perspective, like Anthony Weiner, who like has the entire nude scandal, and that basically tanked his entire political candidacy. Whereas nowadays, I feel like that would just kind of be a blip, and people, will still vote along party lines or whatever their interests are, regardless if someone is, claiming to be a, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would still land to an extent because I think people are looking for traditionalism. But I think, I don't know, I feel like there's still a import of, being like human to an extent that people do understand.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's like that spectrum where people don't want to see it all.
Right.
Because like whether we like to or not, we put kind of this the politicians in this class of people where you're expecting the behavior to be higher, which I think is a lot of people's issue with Trump, is that the reflection of candor isn't always the highest.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also in terms of less about policy. No, you are correct. More about like delivery, presentation, those kinds of things, which still hold steadfast and true. I think there's a divide too. I think older voters have a much different opinion in terms of how much that actually matters to them. Just because they came from, kind of a different landscape, and like, I don't know, not to like really go after older voters, but like, for example, like Watergate being like the scandal that it was versus like, like how that evolved from like, okay, we're trying to divulge information on a prospective opponent to, now, I mean, what's the first thing that you see a lot of times in political ads or smear campaigns, right? So like my own personal connection to that, and something I feel so strongly about, was I was a page for the Maryland State Senate and House of Reps my senior year of high school. Very brief experience. It's not like that laden with, I did a lot, whatever. But, you're there for some pretty memorable moments. Yeah. Like, for example, I was on the, the judicial committee that passed revenge porn laws in the state of Maryland, using things like you can't use nudes to extort people, or like those kinds of things. Like now they fall under a classification of extortion, where in the early 2010s they did not, at least in the state of Maryland. Another thing, medical marijuana reform, and that getting passed, and how it was really a bipartisan effort to make sure that was done. You saw a lot of Republicans diverting to that as a way of like, hey, this will create economic revenue for the state, et cetera, best utilized in our social programs, whatever kind of thing. But the one thing that I think about a lot was working under Senate Minority Leader David Brinkley, who is a Frederick County guy and represented the district for a while, was superseded by Michael Huff, who is now the minority whip in the state of Maryland, and the Senate took over the same role. But, he was running against Huff, and I remember asking him a lot of like, I see a lot of like what Michael is putting out there in terms of like, he was running full-scale ads in newspapers, television, etc. about here's David Brinkley and here's how he's wronged you, versus like Brinkley was like, his ads were very, here's what we've been able to get done, here's what, resonates, etc. And he was super big on like championing the positive and accentuating the positive of his candidacy and not smearing other people around him. He was all like, this is what I do, and if the populace doesn't like it, they'll vote me out, and that's how it goes. And, naturally those negative ads, they have a lot of ability and power, and that's why they're used. And he was voted out a few years later for that exact reason. And like, Brinkley was like, I felt like a super kind of, not maybe like progressive Republican might be the wrong way to say it, but I think he was really willing to reach across the aisle. Maybe not in the same way that somebody like Michael Huff is. But ultimately, like, the demise was the fact that, people were polarized against him. And, there were a lot of other things that were going on, like, I believe, and I don't want to overstate anything, but David Brinkley unfortunately lost his son to drug addiction. A lot of other things that kind of happened along the way. But I think that it speaks to, like, the grander, like, making enemies of people rather than saying, like, this is an American that I share a huge difference of values in, but is an American nonetheless, kind of thing.
Well, it's odd because it seems like we're trending towards this place where they want you to look and present as like an old school politician, but then have the grit and divisiveness of a new school politician.
Yeah.
It's maybe a byproduct of Trump's success, or maybe it happened even earlier, a product of something happening in the media discourse, or just some cultural, maybe the state of the oversaturation of satire in our media. But it's odd to me because you tend, not to get into any politics or things, but on compass wise, where do you feel like you're more leaning right now? Like, if you were like political party wise, like if they were doing a major right now for a presidency, two fresh candidates, whoever and whoever.
Yeah.
Do you have like a side you feel like that's more representative of your ideals right now?
Well, I've been a registered GOP member without voting for a GOP exec pretty much ever. I voted along Senate lines for that and whatnot. Like, I thought Larry Hogan would be a great candidate for presidency. I think there are certain people that I would look at from both sides that I could see appeal in terms of them running. They're probably very different than you. But ultimately, like, I think that, like, I still believe in, a discourse that exists in bipartisan legislature instead of gridlocking the system that we've seen a lot. So I think that just people that are more willing to work on both those ideals are like, I've always said, like, kind of like, hey, if a liberal came forward and basically said, like, no, like, we need, certain corporate tax cuts to be able to incentivize small business in this country, or like, if a Republican candidate came out and said, I'm not going to die on the hill of the abortion thing, like, this is not like, where I will fight, which I feel like Trump has done at certain points, maybe has done, some kind of here and there about, but at the same time, I feel like for me, it's like trying to find somebody that is the most moderate. And I realize that doesn't exist in the greatest landscape. But
well, yeah, no, it's interesting. I totally agree with what you're saying there, because I think that's the problem right now with the Democrat Party, is that there's just not really a foundation that they're flouting to the people, that they can say, hey, this is our plan. This is what we're standing on.
Yeah.
It's all just beset oppositionally.
Well, there's definitely a lot of destruction of discourse within their own party about who should take over.
Yeah, and it's not exclusive to them, too.
No, yeah.
It's on both sides, but the one side still is productive in terms of just those law and order points of discourse. I feel like that's what a lot of people are demanding, and I think what you're getting at is that a Democrat candidate who comes out needs to be able to say, hey, I actually think that a lot of these things are reasonable that they're saying, and it's like almost like an anti-extreme left Democrat, like a throwback kind of like, oh, I respect what you say, or like disagree with what you say, but respect your right to say it. But I feel like instead what's happening is it's like becoming this caricature where Gavin Newsom is like the heir apparent, but for me, he seems very ineffectual. Like, he's not really well received even in his own state.
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of that.
Elected, but I don't know. It seems like they either need to blow it all up or just acquiesce to being like, hey, okay, we don't have that motion right now.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what's led to the fractured whatever. And I think, for better or worse, they called it too late with Joe. I think that you talk to any political whatever, and that's like kind of the discourse. Like, there's been that clip floating around that I think is so like indicative of that, which was, Jake Tapper does the initial debate between Biden and Trump, where Biden is just not there really, and is fumbling over his words, etc., and just confusing talking points and those kinds of things. And in that clip, he and I think it's Andrea Mitchell, could be somebody else, but they passed a note to each other basically saying like he just lost the election kind of thing. Like, those things are important, and I think that it's been a little bit fractured there. There was obviously trying to rally behind Harris. I still think if they really wanted a chance to win, they should have done an open primary, but kind of hard to do that when you're 120 days out from the actual election.
Because just invisibility right now, they just don't have people that I feel like fit the niche of that person you're talking about who is that moderate. They're all so oppositional. Is there one that comes to your mind of a Democrat who hits a moderate tone?
Yeah, Andy Beshear, who's the governor of Kentucky, was once a Republican, now runs as a Democrat, and in a largely Republican state has been the governor there for a long time. I thought he should have been the candidate personally. I think that he's somebody that kind of stands, in that middle of the aisle. I've not championed, but I've always thought it'd be interesting to get somebody out there also with a kind of history of executive statehood. I realize it may not land with you, but Pete Buttigieg is like a name that I come to a lot in terms of just like kind of having that willingness to be able to go out and speak, appear on Fox News, those kinds of things. And I think that those people are like, the drivers of the discourse maybe potentially going forward that haven't really been tabbed yet, because again, like you're saying, that they have leaned into the more extreme voices. I think there's a huge base for somebody like, Ocasio-Cortez, who like obviously has come to massive recognition, not only just from a, name scale, but also from, the way that she goes after things. And I think that sort of intensity is maybe appreciated by people who see the intensity of, certain members of Make America Great, or even, just the traditional GOP, who kind of like blend together. But I think what you say about them being sort of like more united under this kind of like, whether it's a front or not, of, we back the president, we back the executive suite, etc. Those are the things that unfortunately the Dems kind of lost out on, especially in the waning age of Joe Biden, where you had people like, Cuomo or Obama did his best ability to try to save and say this is a man who would be competent and still fit for this job, but it was too little too late. And I think that enough people had kind of made their mind up, and that's why we got the results on the election night that we did. But yeah, it's a really interesting time. I think that there has to be some sort of like uniting factor for the left, because they clearly like are going to need it to be able to contend in a few years, because hypothetically, and I say this with all due respect, but you hypothetically should have a weaker candidate running for the GOP in the next election. Not from a perspective of like weakness, but in terms of like Trump has his polarization, but he has such a strong devout base that like if it is J.D. Vance, as it's kind of talked about right now, I don't know if as many people are as gung-ho on him as they are about Trump.
I don't think it's more likely to be him than it is to be like DeSantis or someone
really?
Like that.
Okay, that would be interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's other options out there too, but like I think people like Marco Rubio too.
Yeah, that could certainly happen. He's had a few failed runs though, which is always kind of like a tough like whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're talking
a lot of the guard that has failed because Trump's won, 2 of the last 3.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of those guys though are fitting that mold, because I think this is the main thing, is the people that live here, the institutional voices that are speaking up of Americans, like actual American citizenry, is making its voice heard. I think as we're seeing in the success of various ad campaigns and in boycotting campaigns, that they're saying, hey, we want to appease a sense of American traditionalism. We want that, or we want our sense of American traditionalism appeased. Right?
Yeah.
And we want some inherent veneration of American values, and we want to hear those things. And so I think if above all else, if there was a liberal that was fitting the mold of those things, just being patriotic, that would be enough motivation for somebody who was like a waning centrist or moderate of the other side, or extremist of the one side, to be like, hey, that's my de-escalation point to that person.
So this is a loaded question, but do you think that like Barack was patriotic?
Well, I mean, I think that I was a lot younger at that time, so my perspective on it all isn't as great. I think that in the most recent media things I see with him, it doesn't tend to be that. It tends to be a preoccupation with social concerns. A lot of the work that I tend to see is like advocacy related things, at least like because I don't go out seeking it. So what ends up usually hitting my algorithm, tends to be those things. I'm sure there's some spaces where he voices positive opinions, but I don't know. It's odd because I think that him and I would conflict on a lot of like those inherent values.
Sure.
I think in some of those respects, I would see myself more as a traditionalist more than him. Like I think he's like a more socially liberal person. I say
Sure.
that based off of just the things I've seen, on my algorithm about him and Michelle's involvement in Netflix.
But do you think
themes?
Do you think that even given his social leaning policies, like, do you think he is like an American patriot? And I'm not saying to like the extent of like Paul Revere or whatever.
I would imagine that he has the intellectual depth to accept that he was like enabled to be who he was because of the American framework, and because of that he has like an overarching patriotism for that. But even that, it feels like a lot to ask of somebody who's trying to maintain a platform that's become centered on institutional America leading us down the wrong path. If you're inherently against nearly everything Trump says, and I'm not saying that Obama is, but that the party that Obama was a part of now primarily hinges its politics in oppositional stances to Trump policies, it leads to a place that feels very anti-patriotic, because it's almost as if to say, like, no matter what happens, we're not going to be happy.
But I also think that criticism of the highest office is, holding people accountable the same way that like people can look back on Barack's tenure and say, the drone strikes in Yemen, the drone strikes in Syria, etc. Like those were things that, could have been, stakes of international conflict that weren't advancing American values, etc. But there were, I think also like a lot of it gets blurred in the national security concerns, right? I think that's true for today's admin. I think it's true for every admin since 9/11, just being honest, like liberal or Democrat.
I think it goes way back, and I don't know if any administration can be called to be excluded from that system, because it's all a spectrum of involvement in nefarious ongoing engagements, but some just aren't involved. So like you have those people who are outside of that whatever system that could be in place, participating in those types of imperialism acts in the modern era or throughout history.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you have the people who were maybe outliers to the system. And so I tend to try not to get too like placed into some of the specifics of like people or like books of ideologies, and more look to like the cultural manifestations in all. Okay. And right now it just seems like the cultural manifestation from the right is one that's more of like, hey, don't we want to root for the home team? Not to say anything specific about those individuals in the policy senses. It just feels like the prevailing sense is not only would those conservative politicians obligatorily signal their patriotism because of that inherent appreciation for American values, but because they know that it placates the desire from people to hear veneration of the place that they live in and that their ancestors lived in.
We talked about this kind of before we started too. Like, I feel like, those values do change over time. There's certainly things that are instilled to us or we would hope are instilled to us, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, those kinds of things that still kind of remain this bastion of core American values, etc. But I think that like the way that people have looked at things, socially have definitely changed from, a perspective of pretty much anything and everything under the sun. But that's like kind of natural human history, right?
Yeah.
And like I like a good example is like, this is kind of a tangent, but like, when I went to synagogue yesterday, it's primarily older people that are there. Yeah. There's really not a lot of young people. And I think that that's true for a lot of denomination of faith throughout the country. I think that there's still, strong ties for people depending on where you are regionally.
There is a big youth movement going on right now.
I would say so, yeah. I think there's definitely more of a push towards it. I also think at the same time, people are becoming more estranged to it. So I think that it's like, one thing doesn't happen kind of within a bubble. It's all sort of a factor of a lot of things, and obviously those are placated on people's individual circumstances as well. How you were received by your organization, like to what extent did it, kind of whatever. Like a great comparison just off the top, knowing myself, is that like, my friends who were born in the New York, Philadelphia, New Jersey area and larger Jewish communities have a much larger tie to that than like I do, who grew up in, what is known as kind of Reform Judaism, which is a very, non-religious, I think is the best way to say it, like
secular.
Yeah, a little bit. Like they all kind of exist. Like there's like the Orthodox and the Hasidim that like, are at the very like, we read every word of the Torah and accept it as God, to like Reconstructionist reform, which are more on the other end of like we live an American lifestyle and like Judaism is part of our culture and our history, but it doesn't like impact our day to day. So I think that like when I look at some of those people from New York, or like I have a very close friend from Washington who grew up in that kind of area, DC, like it is much more tied to him than it is to us. But that again is like, if I was born in his shoes, it would probably be the same way. Like he grew up being around a lot of different Jews, going to temple, etc., those kinds of things with regularity, whereas like for us, like we we're Jewish, absolutely, but like it's not like to the same like extent that other people have. And I think that exists in a lot of different faiths, whether you are like kind of this spiritual, almost like quasi-Buddhist kind of person, to like, even like, more, Christianity, Islam, that can be, taken in ways that are, practicing in your community kind of thing at a basic level, to like championing your life. Like everything you do is in name of that kind of thing. So,
well, I think
and that applies for Judaism as well, by the way. I'm not like diverting that.
I think we tend to see the inflict of like the more militant followings of religious texts.
Totally, because they're the loudest.
Yeah, from those more radicalized voices. And I feel like one thread I've noticed, and this isn't, to all the followers of all the denominations, which is a subject I'm actively trying to find, but with Christianity, is that it produces disproportionately cultures and societies that espouse values of openness and tolerance to other voices.
I think it would depend who you ask and all that. I think there are a lot of churches that are certainly like open to that kind of idea, and I think more so than ever before.
This isn't to say on the specifics of like those meta conversations of the individual, just more that the cultural tolerance that is not unaccepting of alternative ideas. So like the freedom of speech being protected in the majority of Western countries, especially for things like the right to practice your religion independent of whatever like a national religion is. Like I think that goes undervalued in our country. I think that's missed by a lot of people.
Yeah, it does, because like no matter where you look, like there's huge there are groups and communities that kind of exist either separate or homogeneously, like kind of within our society through all faiths. But I think that it's definitely it's been interesting to kind of see like like what you talked about with the resurgence of like more people kind of being involved with the landscape, while also so many kind of divert from it. But I feel like that kind of happening at the same time is like, it doesn't like worry me per se, because again, like that's part of that like freedom of speech and religion and practicability here, which is like a huge thing that we can't ever take for granted. But it's also kind of interesting to see like what that will do to cultural like zeitgeist 20-30 years from now.
Well, I think what people are desperately seeking is fulfillment.
Yeah, for sure. And meaning, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially now where like envy is so rampant and, through social and experiencing other people's lives.
Yeah, and comparison being the thief of joy and all that. But I think even more so in that discussion we were having about, this group of people who may feel very confident about the things they know. Yeah. I think there is this other group that is very confused about the way things are.
Yeah.
And so they're actively seeking, like, how do I get that sense of fulfillment and connection? So a lot of people are turning to religion, and I think what could happen as a result of that is people asking those questions of a political nature, where they look more at it as, hey, are these ideas an existential threat to the safety of your ability to have those wrong ideas? Like, even if you disagree with them.
Yeah.
Like I worry about that. I worry about the people whose ideas I disagree with losing their right to have those disagreements.
That's good.
If the nature of politics ever began to placate those or began to fail to placate those flaws of the human nature, and we stopped protecting freedom of speech, like if we established like hate speech laws, or if we started disarming the people, I think it leads to a place that's less in line with the culture that it seems everybody wanted to emulate. And then we're sort of hitting this postmodernist sense where we began to critique it. And now we're coming back to this reflection point of like, oh, is it actually something worth sacrificing? I don't think so.
But I think the critique is multifaceted, and I think it's important. Like, I'm not a huge fan of him, but like Tim Dillon has a thing where like, the younger generation is more on board with like exploring the this, that, and the other, whether that be, on the right, on the left, etc., because like they've lost kind of the same things that like previous American generations have had, right? Like,
yeah,
especially the ability to like own a home, which seems more and more unattainable for the common man, like, or woman. I mean, like, it's becoming something that is, a lot harder. And I think that, forces people to kind of take a step back from their lives and be like, okay, like what are the values again that, that I champion? And also at the same time, like, what is really what I want out of my time here? And I think that a lot of people, are definitely having more of the existential thing, especially seeing people's, again, I don't want to make this too much about this, but like, the envy aspect of like social, like, I know it's like eating me like a worm, like, especially like from a perspective of like when I look around and see other people within broadcast television, rising to some status or whatever, getting some opportunity. Like, I have to kind of ground myself and remind myself, like, okay, I've had a great, opportunity to, freelance at a station in Washington right now, and, great experience beforehand that's still translating to me getting job interviews and those kinds of things. But I think it's easy to get lost when, you see people's kind of meteoric rise, but ultimately that comes back to like our journeys are so different.
Yeah, well, it's funny for you because you're comparing yourself to, a lot of people who are operating on a very high level, and you are as well, of course. But it's like I would adopt the perspective of like, whatever I can do to improve this vessel on this journey to wherever that destination is best preparing me. So like eating well, just sharpening up the mind with more information and challenges, putting yourself out there to other perspectives.
Yeah, obtaining real life experience, things like that, I think is like the cornerstone of things, and it helps us kind of like get out of that whatever. But, in all of this, I think that like, I think his name was Frank Caprio. He was a judge who passed away recently and got all this like heralded accord for like, you would video a lot of his courtroom and like, dismiss charges for people that were genuinely just trying to do the right thing kind of thing. And he was asked on a podcast recently, like what it means to like live a good life. And his first cornerstone was to be a good family man and have good friends, and I think that those things have been, maybe not like taken from people, but like, people have always grown up with struggle. There's always been, trauma, whatever, laden in experiences that they've had, blah, blah, blah. But I think now, especially more than ever, like having those kinds of things where like you have a set network to come back to is like the kind of things that like support that empowerment that you're talking about while you're on this journey of like self-fulfillment and self-improvement. Like to have that like additional thing is so important. Like I just killed a book. I just read. I really did kill it though. It was like 2 weeks of reading, which is like I tend to be a super slow reader. It's called Stay Sane in an Insane World. It's by this sports psychologist named Greg Harden, who's at the University of Michigan. He worked with everyone as significant as like Tom Brady, Michael Phelps, Desmond Howard, ultra achievers, to like, people who played on the golf team or the volleyball team who, go on to be entrepreneurs, business owners, representatives, whatever kind of thing. A huge thing that he talks about towards the end is that it is natural, important, and needed to be kind of complimented, to be reaffirmed in what you're doing. And I think having that kind of circle and, again, that family, so to speak, whether it's actually biologic or, something that you create, is so integral to that kind of, progression. And I just, I don't know. It's sad that not everybody has it. I feel like both of us are from places where we have family support, in support of our friends and things like that. And I think that that's what strives us to, continue that path of self-improvement. But there's a lot of people that defer from it. I also understand if people kind of like look at the circumstances of the world and feel like they can't make it. Like I was there for a number of months after losing my job with my sports betting business, just like how like kind of listless, despondent that I became in terms of like, wow, can this actually work out for me? And I think it comes down to like betting on yourself, also realizing, the changes in the marketplace, which we kind of talked about earlier with, digital space kind of overtaking broadcast TV and, those kinds of things. I think it's important to ride those waves and try to make the best marriage of all the positive things that you can.
And I really do think that is in this idea space, this creator space, it's disproportionately connected to how just functionally well your brain and body are operating.
Yeah.
So it really involves taking care of yourself to be able to function on that idea level and be able to invoke those challenges to build your perspective of the idea level.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that in a time and day and age where a lot of people are sad, a lot of people are anxious, fearful, and living in the fear is like the primary way to make sure that things like don't get accomplished, don't move forward, etc. But I think it's easy to regress into that, to seek comfort and those kinds of things. And I think seeking comfort is important. We all need what I like to describe as like the hug, right? Whether that comes from like an escape, like consuming media or, playing a video game, getting out, being social with your friends, taking on, maybe even at a more righteous level, like taking on an involvement of like volunteering or giving your time to something that's greater than yourself, I think are the things that like kind of quell those really negative symptoms. And clearly, it's not to diminish them. There are people that have just absolute, massive loss on like a huge level. Like I'm thinking like, how do you get that for somebody like, a person like, and I'll shout this name out very loosely, but like a girl who's connected to some of my friends, Bridget Murphy, who lost her husband in an accident or a natural disaster. They were struck. He was a hunter struck by lightning in Colorado. Jesus. And it's like, moving on from something like that demands the, community around you. It also demands the self-application to like, being able to get past it while also still being in that grief and involving yourself. So, I think you hear of things like that and you squeeze your loved ones a little bit tighter. But it's also just kind of like life's sometimes. And it's awful. So, thinking about their family.
Well, it's interesting too, right? Do you often find yourself thinking in certain social situations about how like your voice in the room dictates like the experience of life to others? Like how in a way you dictate a part of that experience for everyone.
And the key is a part, I think, right? Like you only hold the keys to so much of it. People operate on their own kind of wavelength. They have their beliefs or their systems, routines especially. Just full disclosure, like I'm going on like 6 months of not having a full-time role. And, for me, like that has been consuming a lot of times. And like, I think
consuming in the sense of like self-reflection, or consuming in the sense of like not feeling great about it, like self-doubt about it.
Yeah, that especially. I think self-reflection has to be a part of it to be able to dig yourself out, and put yourself back on the path.
Do you think it's more like rumination of possibilities or reflections on things that could have been?
Yeah, a little bit of that.
A little bit of both.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of regret too, and like you tend to hyperanalyze, especially when like. I also, and I don't want to make a grandiose statement here, but like, especially as men, like not applied like in a certain system, or at least the way that I see it is like, it's difficult for you to find kind of purpose of sorts.
Yes, and it can become easy to reflect on one's past and to see the opportunities one had and like being like, okay, well, if I had just done X, Y, and Z, then I would be the person who I want to be right now, or at least in a better position.
Yeah, but we also never know that for certain.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you can end up taking paths that like they end up being dead ends, and a lot of people do. And I think what really makes the successful people successful, at least through, observation, reading, especially with inquiring with them, like people that I know who like, a good example of this is like a friend of mine who runs a company out in California. Her big thing is to try and fail quickly, is to like get to the failure as quick as possible so that you can pivot and put yourself more in a position to be like, okay, now I am on the track that at least sustains me for short or long term to greater maximize my potential or my mission's potential, whatever it might be. But yeah, I don't know. It's it's very strange and an interesting time to like be a part of this human experience. I obviously think that like the dawn of AI will play so much of like a role into what is, feasible, accomplishable in the next gen. But also like how we maximize our time by utilizing it, and also making sure that it doesn't become too powerful or too involved in our lives. And there are fail safes, loosely speaking, in place right now to prevent that. And I think as with any other great human invention, there's a lot of like trial and error. Like, in the opening ages of the internet, anything and everything went. And like to an extent it still does if you know how to access it. And like I think that like those kinds of things, they lead to just a lot of volatility and unpredictability. But like we kind of have to lean into that if we want to like keep going, because then that's kind of how you find the path. Again, that try and fail quickly is it's like, okay, we've done this and we realize that like, okay, the dark web has a huge ability to accentuate human trafficking, or, big, drug enterprises, or I don't know, whatever else. But like, those things can be counteracted by good faith actors that are looking to actively, crack down on that.
It's easy in the modern era to get bogged down in the cycle of repeated negative thinking, just because it's so latent to the sphere.
Totally. And because life is hard.
Yeah, and I found what tends to alleviate it is this fixation point on a future where your competency is where you want it to be, like just building towards the best you, like eating well, staying in shape, and staying active mentally.
And I think that some people revere those things and they're what they live their lives by. There's clearly the extreme examples, like with anything else, that tend to be the loudest voices. Like I look at Goggins, for example, and I think that like he is a renowned human being and has had the ability to champion his mind over his body at clearly 100+ points in his life, if not every day. But also, like, I also find myself asking, like, does this guy have fun?
Like, in a sense, is it like a somewhat vacuous pursuit? Or
totally.
It's like there's no stigmatization to how anyone spends their time ultimately if it's something they enjoy doing. But it lends to interesting discussions on like what's the right level of ways to do things.
And right is different for everyone.
I think the problem is that from the very beginning, we just have fundamental misconceptions about the important things in life, like getting to that point where you can be just happy doing the things that you love. So like clearly he's doing so many things right, no place to make any aspersions of any sort. But it's interesting to weigh those considerations, like what compromises, or what comprises the optimal life for somebody, because I could never see myself wanting to be an ultra marathon runner, but then there's so many other perspectives of things that I'm like, well, why would you do that, why would you do this? But it's different strokes for different folks.
But I think the cornerstone of like what Goggins has that's really good is the ability to challenge yourself, put yourself outside of that comfort zone in those things, and that's what kind of leads to even more growth than you would ever expect. Because like we can use the running as the example, right? Like people breaking through the glass ceiling, so to speak, on their ability to actually run a half or run an actual marathon. Like I have several friends that have, kind of started as very fair weathered runners, so to speak, and then have gone on to like surpass the ultimate thing. Like my roommate in New York, really great kid, always kind of been athletically gifted a little bit in his life, was a great soccer player and whatnot, but ran a half last year and felt like, wow, that was a great experience. And while I still have this ball rolling, I'm going to train for the New York Marathon, and ended up running it and, completing the race, and didn't meet his time threshold. I think he missed by like 20 minutes or so. But like, just the fact that he did it and whatnot, I think like led to that, just like, I don't know, like larger than life. Like I set a goal and I not only accomplished it, but I accomplished it to the fullest.
Yeah.
And even though maybe it didn't like reach the fullest perspective, like he wanted to run sub 4 hours and ran about 4 hours and 18 minutes, still like did it at a pace that like a lot of people couldn't even dream of.
It's very admirable to be able to challenge oneself.
Yeah.
To do something.
Yeah. And I think that like certain people have levels of challenge that feel okay to them, and some are more extreme than others, right? We use Goggins as the chief example, like running on broken feet and a failing kidney, whatever, failing endocrine system, like those kinds of things. But I think, different strokes for different folks, as you said. Like for some people, that is like course correcting years of, depression or whatever that have limited them to this, and they go out and they get a job, or they go out and they, find some purpose that is really great for them.
Well, I think the things that because I had alluded to saying something that we get wrong in the beginning, is just this emphasis on, getting independently sufficient financially, and mainly nutritionally, like eating well. Because outside of like being with your people and eating right, unless you have one of those hyper pursuits that is like your passion, whatever you do that is in service of the eating well and being with your people is just that, that filler thing.
And we all
get through.
And I think it's like something I always think about, especially financially for myself, is like so many people in this country, and I think the number is as high as it's ever been, but like so many people are living paycheck to paycheck. And it's like how they fit in those other things that like kind of lead to more fulfillment, that lead to, their ability to take a few days off a year to be able to go rest and recharge at a beach or, mountain sites or whatever. I think those are the things that like, we definitely have a super work focused hyper culture. I don't think it's maybe the same as some other societies in the world. Like the first two that come to mind are like Korea and Japan, being like, so work hungry. And there are clearly people that are like that, especially if you are, making sacrifices in the early stage of building a small business, or, building your own product, or like, God, I even like look at, like content creators who will put out 500, 600 videos before they've actually monetized anything.
Yeah.
I think that those kinds of things are like, you need those things. My parents and I have a very different route in terms of like, they kind of had a path that was set for them in terms of, if you do X, then Y. And then if you do Y, then Z, kind of thing. And even though some of those things aren't guaranteed, because you can certainly screw up in the X or the Y enough to not get yourself to the next level, it was like, meet these thresholds past this other thing. It's not the same in something like entertainment or whatever. And I realized maybe you could apply that to business culture, like sales, for example. Like, hey, if I'm the top salesman, I will get a promotion. It doesn't always work that way. It really doesn't. But I think that there's something to be said for like the people that like kind of know that they're in that fear but operate anyways. And continue to just kind of push to whatever's next. Like I have a friend of a friend who's like been a great contact, but a guy who's a culinary creator on TikTok who's now one of the largest on the platform. But I remember talking with him kind of in the early stages when he was at like that 700, 800,000 follower mark, starting to make some of the brand deals happen for himself, and was actually making like a decent living. Granted, putting a lot of that money back into his business models. And he sold, the common thing for a lot of food people is you sell seasoning blends, you sell like, shelf-stable items like pickled onions, like sauces, stuff like that. But, he wanted something greater out of it, a chance to experience community, and built the business over 3-4 years, did a cookbook, all this other stuff that was really well received, to the point where he was like, I'm going to open a restaurant. And now has a restaurant on the in the West Village of New York. And it's like, and it's going super well for him. And obviously, like, he is working his ass off. He's there. They have a very different model. They're Thursday to Sunday kind of thing, but he's in there every day before dawn, getting things ready. And they serve one thing, French dip sandwiches to people. And it's like, getting those out to as many people as possible. And, people have come, they've done self-promotion for him, they have a line down the block pretty much every day, so he is by all means a success story. But that success hasn't come without a lot of like just trying to overcome that whatever else is out there. He told me for a while that like, he just was having serious anxiety about like where it would go for him and whatnot. But I think it's those people that kind of push through that doubt that end up getting the end result. And a lot of people, like can look at that and say, well, he's an outlier. There's hundreds of other content creators out there, especially in the food space, that are like right there, but don't like, maybe they're making a couple $100 a video kind of thing, but they're just like, man, is the juice worth the squeeze? And then they have to kind of evaluate. I'm seeing that from a lot of my broadcast peers now, people that are either getting laid off or unable to move up past the market space. And they're like, should I go into general communications? Should I go, work for a medical system where I do PR and I make $200,000 a year and, it's like a 40-hour a week job instead of the, whatever thing? Or do I keep this dream alive, working for 60, 70 grand and, going out and setting up my own camera and doing a lot of the things, and ultimately people just have to decide on that. I think in a few years, if it doesn't start to elevate for me, I'm gonna have to make that decision too, because I'm at a point where like I realize that like I have a lot of friends, and I think this is another thing from a social thing, like I have a lot of friends getting engaged or like starting to have children or moving on to that phase of life, and it's like I always kind of saw that happening for me in my late 30s, early 40s, but at the trek I'm on right now, it's like that, and as men have a little bit of an advantage from a biological clock not like running out for us in that capability. But it's man, I mean it comes down to everybody's choices and like what really is of value and importance for you. And that's why you have everyone who is like from as machiney and like go all the time at the very top level, someone like Elon Musk, or somebody who runs a 100-person company or even a 50-person company like my friend in California, to like there are people that are just like, I am cool to be a good employee at a business that gives me good benefits and gives me 3 weeks a year off and allows me to spend more time with my child that I had at 28, 29, 30, whatever. So
well, I think you've proven in this conversation that in terms of versatility, there are plenty of things that you are proficient at talking about.
Yeah, well, hopefully.
And if you have to invoke any of those other options, I think you are well equipped.
Thanks.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think you do very well in the political sphere.
Thank you.
Yeah. Especially if you're able to provide that nuanced voice that people are looking for.
Yeah, for sure.
It's hard to do.
Yeah, and I think I know we're running out of time here, but like I always come back to like working with a local news organization was always important for me because like it accentuated what like communities needed to hear. And I think that even though a lot of that business model is dying, there will never not be a need for news in your community, whether it's about, some of the more heavy things, crime, corruption, etc., to just like what is being, what is happening to, empower people, or how are people empowering others around them. And I think that that's like, such a cornerstone of the local markets that, my friends and I kind of work in.
Here, read this joke.
Okay. Is it a joke? It seems okay. A man devoid of thoughts, bankrupt of moral currency, toils meekly in the doldrums of mediocrity, a blight which persists through listless repetitions of mechanical tasks.
Wasn't very funny.
I read the first two sentences from afar and I was like, I wonder where the punchline will be.
All right, man.
Dude, you did a great job with this. This was great. I'm happy we can have this conversation.
Thank you.
I know that this is early on in your journey, but you did a great job of like opening things up. So
I appreciate that, and I feel bad we ran over time a bit.
No, it's okay.
I knew it could happen. It's the nature of having conversations with good friends, especially when you get to talk about topics that you don't always get to talk about because they're kind of implied.
Yeah.
Like we know each other, but it's great to be able to reflect on the origin stories.
For sure, yeah. And, especially as people that grew up with stones thrown away from each other and whatnot. I feel like that shaping those developmental years and like playing youth sports to kind of come back to it kind of thing, and like just seeing that progression over time.
It gives us a great grounding point. I think that's the real advantage to like inside jokes and like family memories and stuff, is it like connects you to all those little stages, and you stop filling in those gaps with like avoiding it or like putting in that space,
For sure, yeah. And I think that like that's like the community root and things that I cherish in our relationship and the others that I hold too. So
absolutely, brother.
Yo,
well, thank you so much for your time. You did too, man.
I appreciate it.
You're a fantastic guest. We'll have to do this again soon.
Yeah, happy to.
Appreciate everybody for viewing.
Hey, thanks.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Peace out.
Thank you. Peace.
Good job, dude. It was great.
You.
Absolutely.
I appreciate
I got
you,
to dart to your restaurant.